Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jack, Panda, obviously, and it's nice to see everyone again. It's been a while since I've last done a reading stream, and I'm quite excited to get back into it, because I've honestly missed them. I like doing reading streams, but I thought maybe I'd start doing them earlier on in the day. Hey Diabetes, how you doing? And yay, dancing chocobos, my favourite. I mean, I've got a lot of favourite chocobos, but dancing chocobos are pretty rad. But anyway, how you doing? And yes, I couldn't get a much larger hat than this because nothing fits my ears. But oh well, I'll make do. It's quite appropriate for the time. We are reading Going Postal by Terry Pratchett. And it's one of the first Terry Pratchett books I actually read, and I don't remember why. It's a very small hat, but it works. And it's thematically appropriate. It's just a shame I don't have any golden hats like he does. Although Moist doesn't like his golden hats anyway, but never mind. Point is, this was one of my first Terry Pratchett books, and I don't know why. I forget who bought it for me or why I bought it. I don't remember. But I just remember picking it up and being absolutely fascinated by it. And I think I read it within about 2 days because I just couldn't put it down. And I'm sure at least a couple people here have heard of Terry Pratchett, if not read some of his stuff. But not everyone knows, so yeah. But regardless, I'm very excited to read. Is the music too loud? I'm wondering if it would be better to turn it off, but it seems quite loud on my end. I think it's always fairly loud on my end. Oh well. You know you read The Colour of Magic and Mort. They're both good books. Feet of Clay is pretty good too. And so is one of my other favourites, The Night Watch. I think it's The Night Watch. Anyway, we're going to get right back into it. The music's fine. Okay, good. Okay. So we start with the 9,000 Year Prologue. Is it prologue? I hope I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Prologue? Anyway. The flotillas of the dead sailed around the world on underwater rivers. Very nearly nobody knew about them, but the theory is easy to understand. It runs, the sea is, after all, in many respects only a wetter form of air, and it is known that air is denser the lower you go and lighter the higher you fly. As a storm-tossed ship founders and sinks, therefore, it must reach a depth where the water below it is just viscous enough to stop its fall. In short, it stops sinking and ends up floating on an underwater surface beyond the reach of the storms, but far above the ocean floor. It's calm there. Dead calm. Some stricken ships have rigging. Some even have sails. Many still have crew tangled in the rigging or lashed to the wheel. But the voyages still continue, aimlessly, with no harbour in sight, because there are currents under the ocean, and so the dead ships with their skeleton crews sail on around the world, over sunken cities and between drowned mountains, until rot and shipworms eat them away and they disintegrate. Sometimes an anchor drops all the way to the dark, cold calmness of the abyssal plain, and disturbs the stillness of centuries by throwing up a cloud of silt. One nearly hit Anghamrad, where he sat watching the ships drift by, far overhead. He remembered it because it was the only really interesting thing to happen for 9,000 years. And now the 1 month prologue. There was this disease that the Claxman got. It was like the illness known as calancha that sailors experienced when, having been becalmed for weeks under a pitiless sun, they suddenly believed that the ship was surrounded by green fields and stepped overboard. Sometimes the Claxmen thought they could fly. There was about 8 miles between the big semaphore towers, and when you were at the top, you were maybe 150 feet above the plains. Work up there too long without a hat on, they said, and the tower you were on got taller and the nearest tower got... The tower you were on got taller, and the nearest tower got closer, and maybe you thought you could jump from one to the other, or ride on the invisible messages sleeting between them, or perhaps you thought that you were a message. Perhaps, as some said, all this was nothing more than a disturbance in the brain, caused by the wind in the rigging. No one knew for sure. People who step onto the air 150 feet above the ground seldom have much to discuss afterwards. The tower shifted gently in the wind, but that was okay. There were lots of new designs in this tower. It stored the wind to power its mechanisms. It bent rather than broke. It acted more like a tree than a fortress. You could build most of it on the ground and raise it into place in an hour. It was a thing of grace and beauty, and it could send messages up to 4 times faster than the old towers, thanks to the new shutter system and the coloured lights. At least, it would once they had sorted out a few lingering problems. The young man climbed swiftly to the very top of the tower. For most of the way he was in clinging grey morning mist, and then he was rising through glorious sunlight, the mist spreading below him, all the way to the horizon like a sea. He paid the view no attention. He'd never dreamed of flying. He dreamed of mechanisms, of making things work better than they'd ever done before. Right now, he wanted to find out what was making the new shutter array stick again. He oiled the sliders, checked the tension on the wires, and then swung himself out over the fresh air to check the shutters themselves. It wasn't what you were supposed to do, but every linesman knew it was the only way to get things done. Anyway, it was perfectly safe if you... There was a clink. He looked back and saw the snap hook of his safety rope lying on the walkway, saw the shadow, felt the terrible pain in his fingers, heard the scream and dropped, like an anchor. Chapter 1. The Angel. In which our hero experiences hope, the greatest gift, the bacon sandwich of regret, sombre reflections on capital punishment from the hangman, famous last words, our hero dies, angels, conversations about, inadvisability of misplaced offers regarding broomsticks, an unexpected ride, a world free of honest men, a man on the hop, and there is always a choice. They say that the prospect of being hanged in the morning concentrates a man's mind wonderfully. Unfortunately, what the mind inevitably concentrates on is the fact that it is in a body that, in the morning, is going to be hanged. The man going to be hanged had been named Moist von Lipwig by doting, if unwise, parents, but he was not going to embarrass the name insofar as that it was still possible, by being hung under it. To the world in general, and particularly on that bit of it known as the death warrant, he was Albert Spangler. And he took a more positive approach to the situation and had concentrated his mind on the prospect of not being hanged in the morning, and most particularly on the prospect of removing all the crumbling mortar from around a stone in his cell wall with a spoon. So far the work had taken him 5 weeks, and reduced the spoon to something like a nail file. Fortunately, no one ever came to change the bedding here, or else they would have discovered the world's heaviest mattress. It was the large and heavy stone that was currently the object of his attentions, and at some point a huge staple had been hammered into it as an anchor for manacles. Moist sat down facing the wall, gripped the iron ring in both hands, braced his legs against the stones on either side, and heaved. His shoulders caught fire, and a red mist filled his vision, but the block slid out with a faint and inappropriate tinkling noise. Moist managed to ease it away from the hole and peered inside. At the far end was another block, and the mortar around it looked suspiciously strong and fresh. Just in front of it was a new spoon. It was shiny. As he studied it, he heard the clapping behind him. He turned his head, tendons twanging a little riff of agony, and saw several of the warders watching him through the bars. "Well done, Mr. Spangler," said one of them. "Ron here owes me $5. I told him you were a sticker. He's a sticker, I said." You set this up, did you, Mr. Wilkinson? Said Moist weakly, watching the glint of light on the spoon. Oh, no, sir. Lord Vetinari's orders. He insists that all condemned prisoners should be offered the prospect of freedom. Freedom? But there's a damn great stone through here. Yes, there is that, sir. Yeah, there is that, said the warder. It's only the prospect, you see. Not actual free freedom as such. Ah, that'd be a bit daft, wouldn't he, eh? I suppose so, yes, said Moist. He didn't say, you bastards. The warders had treated him quite civilly these past 6 weeks, and he made a point of getting on with people. He was very, very good at it. People skills were part of his stock in trade. They were nearly the whole of it. Besides, these people had big sticks. So speaking carefully, he added, some people might consider this cruel, Mr. Wilkinson. Yes, sir, we asked about that, sir, but he said no, it wasn't. He said it provided... His forehead wrinkled. Occupational therapy. Healthy exercise, prevented moping, and offered the greatest of all treasures, which is hope, sir. Hope, muttered Moist glumly. Not upset, are you, sir? Upset? Why would I be upset, Mr. Wilkinson? Only the last bloke we had in this cell. He managed to get down the drain, sir. Very small man. Very agile. Moist looked at the little grid in the floor. He dismissed it out of hand. Does it lead to the river? He said. The warder grinned. You'd think so, wouldn't you? He was really upset when we fished him out. Nice to see you've entered into the spirit of the thing, sir. You've been an example for all of us, sir. The way you kept going, stuffing the dust in the mattress. Very clever, very tidy, very neat. It's really cheered us up having you in here. By the way, Mrs. Wilkinson says tar very much for the fruit basket. Very posh it is. It's got kumquats even. Don't mention it, Mr. Wilkinson. Hey, Isvar, and thank you for the hydrate. How you doing? How's work going? The warden was a bit green about the kumquats. The warden was a bit green about the kumquats because he only got dates in his. But I told him, sir, that fruit basket is like life. Until you got the pineapple off the top, you never know what's underneath. He says thank you too. Doing what you can with the information you have. Good. Glad he liked it, Mr. Wilkinson, said Moist absent-mindedly. Several of his former landladies had brought him presents for the poor, confused boy, and Moist always invested in generosity. A career like his was all about style, after all. On that general subject, sir, said Mr. Wilkinson, me and the lads were wondering if you might like to unburden yourself at this point in time on the subject of the whereabouts of the place where the location of the spot is where, not to beat around the bush, you hid all that money you stole. The jail went silent. Even the cockroaches were listening. No, I couldn't do that, Mr. Wilkinson, said Moist loudly after a decent pause for dramatic effect. He tapped his jacket pocket, held up a finger, and winked. The warders grinned back. We understand totally, sir. Now I'd get some rest if I were you, sir, 'cause we're hanging you in about half an hour, said Mr. Wilkinson. Hey, don't I get breakfast? Breakfast isn't until 7 o'clock, sir, said the warder reproachfully. But tell you what, I'll do you a bacon sandwich, 'cause it's you, Mr. Spangler. And now it was a few minutes before dawn, and it was him being led down the short corridor and out into the little room under the scaffold. Moist realised he was looking at himself from a distance, as if part of himself was floating outside his body like a child's balloon, ready, as it were, for him to let go of the string. The room was lit by light coming in through cracks in the scaffold floor above, and significantly from around the edges of the large trapdoor. The hinges of said door were being carefully oiled by a man in a hood. He stopped when he saw the party arrive and said, "Good morning, Mr. Spangler." He raised the hood helpfully. "It's me, sir, Daniel, One Drop Trooper. I am your executioner for today, sir. Don't you worry, sir, I've hanged dozens of people. We'll soon have you out of here." Is it true that if a man isn't hanged after 3 attempts, he's reprieved, Dan? said Moist as the executioner carefully wiped his hands on a rag. So I've heard, sir, so I've heard, but they don't call me one drop for nothing, sir. And will sir be having the black bag today? Will it help? Some people think it makes them look more dashing, sir, and it stops that pop-eyed look. It's more a crowd thing, really. Quite a big one out there this morning. Nice piece about you in the Times yesterday, I thought. All of them people saying what a nice young man you were, and everything, Would you mind signing the rope beforehand, sir? I mean, I won't have a chance to ask you afterwards, eh? You think it's Egan Spangler? It's actually Spangler, not Spengler. And, oh, hey, yes. Hey, Ben, thank you. Thank you for the posture check. I was slumping. I really... was thinking, because I know you've changed your name recently, but I still think of Silver. Silver, it is Silver JAQK. But it is Ben now, right? Or am I getting that wrong? I hope I'm not getting that wrong. I might be getting that wrong. Anyway. Signing the rope, said Moist. Yes, sir, said the hangman. It's sort of traditional. There's a lot of people out there who buy old rope. Specialist collectors, you could say. A bit strange, but it takes all sorts, eh? Worth more signed, of course. He flourished a length of stout rope. I've got a special pen that signs on rope. One signature every couple of inches. Straightforward signature. No dedication needed. Worth money to me, sir. I'd be very grateful. So grateful that you won't hang me then? Said Moist, taking the pen. That got an appreciative laugh. Mr. Trooper watched him sign along the length, nodding happily. Well done, sir. That's my pension plan you're signing there. Now, are we ready, everyone? Not me, said Moist quickly to another round of general amusement. You have a history with your @name, so just call you Ven. Okay. Yeah. You're a card, Mr. Spengler, said Mr. Wilkinson. It won't be the same without you around, and that's the truth. Not for me, at any rate, said Moist. This was, once again, treated like rapier wit. Moist sighed. Do you really think all this deters crime, Mr. Trooper? He said. Well, the generality of things, I'd say, is it's hard to tell, given that it's hard to find evidence of crimes not committed, said the hangman, giving the trapdoor a final rattle. But in the specifically, sir, I'd say it's very officious. Meaning what? Said Moist. Meaning I've never seen someone up here more than once, sir. Shall we go? There was a stir when they climbed up into the chilly morning air, followed by a few boos and even some applause. People were strange like that. Steal $5 and you were a petty thief. Steal thousands of dollars and you were either a government or a hero. Ow. Okay, well, I hope you sleep well. Thanks for stopping in. Moist stared ahead while the roll call of his crimes was read out. He couldn't help feeling that it was so unfair. He'd never so much as tapped someone on the head. He'd never even broken down a door. He had picked locks on occasion, but he'd always locked them again behind him. Apart from all those repossessions, bankruptcies, and sudden insolvencies, what had he actually done that was bad as such? He'd only been moving numbers around. Nice crowd turned out today, sir, said Mr. Trooper, tossing the end of the rope over the beam and busying himself with knots. Lots of press, too. What gallows covers them all, of course. And there's the Times and the Pseudopolis Herald, probably because of the bank what collapsed there. And I heard there's a man from the Stowe Plains dealer, too. Very good financial section. I always keep an eye on the used rope prices. Looks like a lot of people want to see you dead, sir. Moist was aware that a black coach had drawn up at the rear of the crowd. There was no coat of arms on the door, unless you were in on the secret, which was that Lord Vetinari's coat of arms featured a sable shield, black on black. You had to admit that the bastard had style. Huh, what? He said in response to a nudge. I asked if you had any last words, Mr. Spangler, said the hangman. It's customary. I wonder if you might have thought of any. I wasn't actually expecting to die, said Moist. And that was it. He really hadn't until now. He'd been certain that something would turn up. Good one, sir, said Mr. Wilkinson. We'll go with that, shall we? Moist narrowed his eyes. The curtain on a coach window had twitched. The coach door had opened. Hope, that greatest of all treasures, ventured a little glitter. No, they're not my actual last words, he said. Let me think. A slight clerk-like figure was descending from the coach. It's not as bad a thing I do now. Aha. It all made some kind of sense now. Vetinari was out to scare him. That was it. That would be just like the man from what Moist had heard. There was going to be a reprieve. Down below, the clerk was having difficulty getting through the press of people. Do you mind speeding up a bit, Mr. Spangler? Said the hangman. Fair's fair, eh? I want to get it right, said Moist haughtily, watching the clerk negotiate his way around a large troll. Yes, but there's a limit, sir, said the hangman, annoyed at this breach of etiquette. Otherwise you could go, for days. Short and sweet, that's the style. Right, said Spangler. Oh look, see that man there waving at you? The hangman glanced down at the clerk, who'd struggled to the front of the crowd. I bring a message from Lord Vetinari, the man shouted. Right, said Moist. He says to get on with it. It's long past dawn, said the clerk. Oh, said Moist, staring at the black coach. That damn Vetinari had a warder's sense of humour too. Come on, Mr. Spangler. You don't want to see me getting into trouble, do you? Said the hangman, patting him on the shoulder. Just a few words and then we can all get on with our lives. Present company accepted, obviously. So this was it. It was, in some strange way, rather liberating. You didn't have to fear the worst that could happen anymore, because this was it, and it was nearly over. The warder had been right. What you had to do in this life was get past the pineapple, Moist told himself. It was big and sharp and knobbly, but there might be peaches underneath. It was a myth to live by, and so, right now, totally useless. In that case, said Moist von Litvig, I commend my soul to any god that can find it. Nice, said the hangman, and pulled the lever. Albert Spangler died. It was generally agreed that they had been good last words. Ah, Mr. Litvig, said a distant voice, getting closer. I see you are awake, and still alive at the present time. There was a slight inflection to that last phrase. Fade to black roll credits, pretty much. Which told Moist that the length of the present time was entirely in the gift of the speaker. He opened his eyes. He was sitting in a comfortable chair. At a desk opposite him, sitting with his hands steepled reflectively in front of his pursed lips, was Havelock, Lord Vetinari, under whose idiosyncratically despotic rule Ankh-Morpork had become the city where, for some reason, everyone wanted to live. An ancient animal sense also told Moist that other people were standing behind the uncomfortable chair, and that it could be extremely uncomfortable should he make any sudden movements. But they couldn't be as terrible as the thin, black-robed man with the fussy little beard and the pianist's hands who was watching him. Shall I tell you about angels, Mr. Litvig? Said the patrician pleasantly. I know 2 interesting facts about them. Moist grunted. There were no obvious escape routes in front of him, and turning round was out of the question. His neck ached horribly. Oh yes, you were hanged, said Vetinari. A very precise science hanging. Mr. Trooper is a master. The slippage and thickness of the rope, whether the knot is placed here rather than there, the relationship between weight and distance. Oh, I'm sure the man could write a book. You were hanged to within an inch of your life, I understand. A half inch, even. Only an expert standing right next to you would have spotted that. And in this case, the expert was our friend Mr. Trooper. No, Albert Spangler is dead, Mr. Lipvig. 300 people would swear they saw him die. He leaned forward. And so, appropriately, it is of angels I wish to speak to you now. Moist managed a grunt. The first interesting thing about angels, Mr. Lipvig, is that sometimes, very rarely, at a point in a man's career where he has made such a foul and tangled mess of his life that death appears to be the only sensible option an angel appears to him, or should say, unto him, and offers him a chance to go back to the moment when it all went wrong, and this time do it right, Mr. Lipvig. I should like you to think of me as an angel. Nobby Nobbs is an avatar of the fifth elephant, prove you wrong. Hey, Kath, I'm reading Going Postal from Terry Pratchett. One of my favourite Terry Pratchett books, and one of my favourite books in general, actually. It's about a con artist who... Yeah, Discworld, obviously. Yeah, it's about a con man who is hanged and offered a second chance at life, which we're now getting to. Moist stared. He felt the snap of the rope, the choke of the noose. He'd seen the blackness welling up. He died. I'm offering you a job, Mr. Lipvig. Albert Spangler is buried, but Mr. Lipvig has a future. It may, of course, be a very short one, if he is stupid. I am offering you a job, Mr. Lipvig. Work for wages. I realise the concept may not be familiar. Only as a form of hell, Moist thought. The job is that of Postmaster General of the Ankh-Morpork Post Office. Moist continued to stare. May I just add, Mr. Lipvig, that behind you there is a door. If at any time in this interview that you feel you wish to leave, you have only to step through it, and you will never hear from me again. Moist filed that under deeply suspicious. To continue, the job of Mr. Lipvig involves the refurbishment and running of the city's postal service, preparation of the international packets, maintenance of post office property, etc., etc. If you stick a broom up my arse, I could probably sweep the floor too, said a voice. Moist realised it was his. His brain was a mess. It had come as a shock to find the afterlife is this one. Lord Veterinary gave him a long, long look. Well, if you wish, he said, and turned to a hovering clerk. Drumknot, does the housekeeper have a store cupboard on this floor? Do you know? Oh yes, my lord, said the clerk. Shall I? It was a joke, Moist burst out. Oh, I'm sorry. I hadn't realised, said Lord Veterinary, turning back to Moist. Do tell me if you feel obliged to make another one, will you? Look, said Moist. I don't know what's happening here, but I don't know anything about delivering post. Mr. Moist, this morning you had no experience at all of being dead, and yet but for my intervention you would nevertheless have turned out to be extremely good at it, said Lord Veterinary sharply. It just goes to show you never know until you try. When you were in high school, you made the first and only ever OC Donut Steel character, and it was from Discworld. It was for an RP forum. Professor Tibblewinkle, chair of the seriously old and not saved magic. His only trait was that he was a bumbling fool, but also had uncanny luck, which helped him avoid danger most of the time without noticing he ever did it. A halfling wizard with divination as a magic speciality in D&D terms. I see. I technically had a character too. I borrowed the name. It was a World of Warcraft character though. It was an undead thief called Mortis von Lipvig. And I was very proud of him and I played him for years. And he's still one of my favourite characters. But he was loony. He wasn't... he didn't have every single marble. mostly because of death. But anyway. But when you sentenced me... Vetinari raised a pale hand. Ah? He said. Moist's brain, at last aware that it needed to do some work here, stepped in and replied, when you sentenced Albert Spangler. Well done. Do carry on. You said he was a natural-born criminal, a fraudster by vocation, a habitual liar, a perverted genius, and totally untrustworthy. Are you accepting my offer, Mr. Lipvig? Said Vetinari sharply. Moist looked at him. Excuse me, he said, standing up. I'd just like to check something. And don't worry. There were two men dressed in black standing behind his chair. It wasn't a particularly neat black. More the black worn by people who just don't want little marks to show. They looked like clerks until you met their eyes. They stood aside as Moist walked towards the door which, as promised, was indeed there. He opened it very carefully. There was nothing beyond, and that included a floor. In the manner of one who is going to try out all possibilities, he took the remnant of spoon out of his pocket and let it drop. It was quite a long time before he heard the jingle. Then he went back and sat in the chair. The prospect of freedom, he said. Exactly, said Lord Vetinari. There is always a choice. You mean I could choose certain death? A choice, nevertheless, said Vetinari. Or perhaps an alternative. You see, I believe in freedom, Mr. Lipvig. Not many people do. Although they will, of course, protest otherwise. And no practical definition of freedom would be complete without the freedom to take the consequences. Indeed, it is the freedom upon which all the others are based. Now, will you take the job? No one will recognize you, I am sure. No one ever recognizes you, it would appear. Moist shrugged. Oh, all right, Of course I accept as a natural-born criminal, habitual liar, fraudster, and totally untrustworthy perverted genius. Capital. Welcome to government service, said Lord Vetinari, extending his hand. I pride myself on being able to pick the right man. The wage is $20 a week, and I believe the Postmaster General has the use of a small apartment in the main building. I think there's a hat too. I shall require regular reports. Good day. He looked down his paperwork. He looked up. You appear to be still here, Postmaster General. And that's it, said Moist aghast. 1 minute I'm being hanged, next minute you're employing me. Let me see. Yes, I think so. Oh no, of course, Drumknot. Do give Mr. Lipvig his keys. The clerk stepped forward and handed Moist a huge, rusted keyring full of keys and proffered a clipboard. Sign here, please, Postmaster General, he said. Hold on a minute, Moist thought. This is only one city. It's got gates. It's completely surrounded by different directions to run. Does it matter what I sign? Certainly, he said and scribbled his name. Your correct name, if you please, said Lord Vetinari, not looking up from his desk. What name did he sign, Drumknot? The clerk craned his head. Ethel Snake, my lord, as far as I can make out. Do try to concentrate, Mr. Lipvig, said Vetinari wearily, still apparently reading the paperwork. Moist signed again. After all, what would it matter in the long run? And it would certainly be a long run if he couldn't find a horse. And that only leaves the matter of your parole officer, said Lord Vetinari, still engrossed in the paper before him. Parole officer? Yes, I'm not completely stupid, Mr. Lipvig. He will meet you outside the post office building in 10 minutes. Good day. When Moist had left, Drumknot coughed politely and said, Do you think he'll turn up there, my lord? One must always consider the psychology of the individual, said Vetinari, correcting the spelling on an official report. That is what I do all the time, and lamentably, Drumknot, you do not always do. that is why he has walked off with your pencil. Always move fast. You never know what's catching you up. 10 minutes later, Moist von Lipwig was well outside the city. He'd bought a horse, which was a bit embarrassing, but speed had been of the essence, and he'd only had time to grab one of his emergency stashes from its secret hiding place and pick up a skinny old screw from the bargain box in Hobson's livery stable. At least it'd mean no irate citizen going to the watch. No one had bothered him. No one had looked at him twice. No one ever did. The city gates had indeed been wide open. The plains lay ahead of him, full of opportunity, and he was good at parlaying nothing into something. For example, at the first little town he came to, he'd go to work on this old nag with a few simple techniques and ingredients that'd make it worth twice the price he paid for it. At least for about 20 minutes or until it rained. 20 minutes would be enough time to sell it, and with any luck, pick up a better horse worth slightly more than the asking price. He'd do it again at the next town, and in 3 days, maybe 4, he'd have a horse worth owning. But that would be just a sideshow, something to keep his hand in. He'd got 3 very nearly diamond rings sewn into the lining of his coat, a real one in the secret pocket in his sleeve, and a very nearly gold dollar stitched cunningly into the collar. These were, to him, what his saw and hammer are to a carpenter. They were primitive tools, but they'd put him back in the game. There is a saying, "You can't fool an honest man," which is much quoted by people who make a profitable living by fooling honest men. Moist never knowingly tried it anyway. If you did fool an honest man, he tended to complain to the local watch, and these days they were harder to buy off. Fooling dishonest men was a lot safer, and somehow more sporting. And of course, there were so many more of them. You hardly had to aim. Half an hour after arriving in the town of Hapley, where a big city was a tower of smoke on the horizon, he was sitting outside an inn, downcast, with nothing in the world but a genuine diamond ring worth $100 and a pressing need to get home to Genua, where his poor aged mother was dying of gnats. 11 minutes later, he was standing patiently outside the jeweller's shop, inside which the jeweller was telling a sympathetic citizen that the ring that the stranger was prepared to sell for $20 was worth $75. Even jewellers have to make a living. And 35 minutes after that, he was riding out on a better horse, with $5 in his pocket, leaving behind a gloating, sympathetic citizen who, despite having been bright enough to watch Moist's hands carefully, was about to go back to the jeweller to try and sell, for $75, a shiny brass ring with a glass stone that was worth 50 pence of anybody's money. The world was blessedly free of honest men, and wonderfully full of people who believed they could tell the difference between an honest man and a crook. He tapped his jacket pocket. The jailers had taken the map off him, of course, probably while he was busy being a dead man. It was a good map, and in studying it, Mr. Wilkinson and his chums would learn a lot about decryption, geography, and devious cartography. They wouldn't find it in the whereabouts of 150 Ankh-Morpork dollars in mixed currencies, though, because the map was a complete and complex fiction. However, Moist entertained a wonderfully warm feeling inside to think that they would, for some time, possess that greatest of all treasures, which is hope. Anyone who couldn't simply remember where he'd stashed a great big fortune deserved to lose it, in Moist's opinion. But for now, he'd have to keep away from it, while having it to look forward to. Moist didn't even bother to note the name of the next town. It had an inn, and that was enough. He took a room with a view over a disused alley, checked that the window was opened easily, ate an adequate meal, and had an early night. Not bad at all, he thought. This morning he'd been on a scaffold with an actual noose around his actual neck. Tonight he was back in business. All he would need to do now is grow a beard again and keep away from Ankh-Morpork for 6 months. Or perhaps only 3. Moist had a talent. He'd also acquired a lot of skills so completely that they were second nature. He'd learned to be personable, but something in his genetics made him unmemorable. He had the talent of not being noticed, for being a face in the crowd. People had difficulty describing him. He was about 20, or about 30. On watch reports across the continent, he was anywhere between, about 6'2" and 5 feet 9 inches tall, hair all shades from mid-brown to blonde, and his lack of distinguishing features included his entire face. He was about average. What people remembered was the furniture, things like spectacles and mustaches, so he always carried a selection of both. They remembered names and mannerisms too. He had hundreds of those. Oh, and they remembered that they'd been richer before they met him. At 3 in the morning, the door burst open. It was a real burst. Bits of wood clattered off the wall, but Moist was already out of bed and diving for the window before the first of them hit the floor. It was an automatic reaction that owed nothing to thought. Besides, he checked before lying down and there was a large water butt outside that would break his fall. It wasn't there now. Whoever had stolen it had not stolen the ground it stood on, however, and it broke Moist's fall by twisting his ankle. He pulled himself up, keening softly in agony, and hopped along the alley, using the wall for support. The inn stables were round the back. All he had to do was pull himself up onto a horse. Any horse. "Mr. Lipvig!" A big voice bellowed. Oh gods, it was a troll. It sounded like a troll. A big one too. He didn't know you got any down here outside the cities. "You can't run and you can't hide, Mr. Lipvig." Hold on. He hadn't given his real name to anyone in this place, had he? But all this was background thinking. Someone was after him. Therefore he would run, or hop. He risked a look behind him when he reached the back gate to the stables. There was a red glow in his room. Surely they weren't torching the place over a matter of a few dollars. How stupid! Everyone knew that if you got lumbered with a good fake, you palmed it off to some other sucker as soon as possible, didn't they? There was no helping some people. His horse was alone in the stable and seemed unimpressed to see him. He got the bridle on while hopping on one foot. There was no point in bothering with a saddle. He knew how to ride without a saddle. Hell, once he'd ridden without pants too, but luckily all the tar and feathers helped him stick to the horse. He was the world champion at leaving town in a hurry. He went to lead the horse out of the stall and heard the clink. He looked down and kicked some straw away. There was a bright yellow bar joining 2 short lengths of chain with a yellow shackle attached, one for each foreleg. The only way this horse would go anywhere was by hopping, just like him. They'd clamped it. They'd bloody clamped it. "Oh, Mr. Lipvig!" The voice boomed out across the stable yard. Oh, goddammit. Thank you, Zvar. I thought I'd changed it. I really wish there was an actual reading category as well. Never mind. Okay, there we go. Thank you. The voice boomed out across the stable yard. "Do you want to know the rules, Mr. Lipvig?" He looked around in desperation. There was nothing in here to use as a weapon. And in any case, weapons made him nervous, which was why he'd never carried one. Weapons raised the ante far too high. It was much better to rely on a gift for talking his way out of things, confusing the issue, and if that failed, some well-soled shoes and a cry of, "Look, what's that over there?" But he had a definite feeling that while he could talk as much as he liked, out here no one was going to listen. As for speeding away, he'd just have to rely on hop. When a random person expecting a pansexual stream wells in just sees a cute panda reading Terry Pratchett. She wouldn't response. Who knows? I just hope it's positive enough for them to stick around. There was a yard broom and a wooden feed bucket in the corner. He stuck the head of the broom under his armpit and to make as a crutch and grabbed the bucket handle as heavy footsteps thudded towards the stable door. When the door was pushed open, he swung the bucket as hard as he could and felt it shatter. Splinters filled the air. A moment later, there was the thump of a heavy body hitting the ground. Moist hopped over it and plunged unsteadily into the dark. Something as tough and hard as a shackle snapped around his good ankle. He hung from the broom handle for a second and then collapsed. I have nothing but good feelings towards you, Mr. Lipvig, boomed the voice cheerfully. Moist groaned. The broom must have been kept as an ornament, because it certainly hadn't been used much on the accumulations in the stable yard. On the positive side, this meant he had fallen into something soft. On the negative side, it meant that he had fallen into something soft. Someone grabbed a handful of his coat and lifted him bodily out of the muck. Up we get, Mr. Lipwig. It's pronounced Lipvig, you moron, he moaned. It's a V, not a W. Up we get, Mr. Lipvig, said the booming voice, as his broom/crutch was pushed under his arm. What the hell are you? Lipvig managed. I am your parole officer, Mr. Lipvig. Moist managed to turn around and looked up, and then up again, into a gingerbread man's face with two glowing red eyes in it. When it spoke, its mouth was a glimpse into an inferno. A golem. You're a damn golem. The thing picked him up in one hand and slung him over its shoulder. It ducked into the stables and Moist, upside down with his nose pressed against the terracotta of the creature's body, realized that it was picking up his horse in its other hand. There was a brief whinny. Did anyone ever hear a better build-up for a golem? You didn't want to spoil it. I do love the golem. I can't remember her name, though. It's been so long since I've read this. We must make haste, Mr. Lipvig. You are due in front of Lord Veterinary at 8 o'clock, and at work by 9. Moist groaned. Ah, Mr. Lipvig. Regrettably, we meet again, said Lord Veterinary. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. Moist was swaying. His ankle felt better, but it was the only part of him that did. It walked all night, he said. All damn night, carrying a horse as well. Do sit down, Mr. Lipvig, said Veterinary, looking up from the table and gesturing wearily to the chair. By the way, it is a he, an honorific in this case clearly, but I have great hopes of Mr. Pump. Moist saw the glow on the walls as behind him the golem smiled. Veterinary looked down at the table again, and seemed to lose interest in Moist for a moment. A slab of stone occupied most of the table. Little carved figurines of dwarves and trolls covered it. It looked like some kind of game. Mr. Pump, said Moist. Said Veterinary, moving his head to look at the board from a slightly different viewpoint. Moist leaned toward the patrician and jerked a thumb in the direction of the golem. That, he said, is Mr. Pump. No, said Lord Veterinary, leaning forward likewise and suddenly, completely and disconcertingly focusing on Moist. He is Mr. Pump. Mr. Pump is a government official. Mr. Pump does not sleep. Mr. Pump does not eat. And Mr. Pump, Postmaster General, does not stop. And that means what exactly? It means that if you are thinking of, say, finding a ship headed for Forex on the basis that Mr. Pump is big and heavy and travels only at walking pace, Mr. Pump will follow you. You have to sleep. Mr. Pump does not. Mr. Pump does not breathe. The deep abyssal plains of the oceans present no barrier to Mr. Pump. 4 miles an hour is 672 miles in a week. It all adds up, and when Mr. Pump catches you... Ah, now, said Moist, holding up a finger. Let me stop you there. I know golems are not allowed to hurt people. Lord Veterinary raised his eyebrows. Good heavens! Wherever did you hear that? It's written on something inside their heads. A scroll or something, isn't it? Said Moist, uncertainty rising. Oh dear, the patrician sighed. Mr. Pump, just break one of Mr. Lipvig's fingers, will you? Neatly, if you please. Yes, your lordship, the golem lumbered forward. Hey, no, what? Moist waved his hands wildly and knocked game pieces tumbling. Wait, there's a rule. A golem mustn't harm a human being or allow a human being to come to harm. Yes, the Asimov law. Exactly. Lord Veterinary raised a finger. Just wait one moment, please, Mr. Pump. Very well, Mr. Lipvig. Can you remember the next bit? The next bit? What next bit? Said Moist. There isn't a next bit. Lord Veterinary raised an eyebrow. Mr. Pump, he said. Unless ordered to do so by duly constituted authority, said the golem. I've never heard that bit before. Haven't you? Said Lord Veterinary in apparent surprise. I can't imagine who would fail to include it. A hammer can hardly be allowed to refuse to hit the nail on the head, nor a saw to make moral judgments about the nature of the timber. In any case, I employ Mr. Trooper the hangman, whom of course you have met, and the city watch, the regiments, and from time to time, other specialists who are fully entitled to kill in their own defense or in protection of the city and its interests. Veterinary started to pick up the fallen pieces and replace them delicately on the slab. Why should Mr. Pump be any different just because he is made of clay? Ultimately, so are we all, Mr. Pump. No, ultimately, so are we all. Mr. Pump will accompany you to your place of work. The fiction will be that he is your bodyguard, as befits a senior government official. We alone will know that he has additional instructions. Golems are highly moral creatures by nature, Mr. Lipvig, but you may find their morality a shade old-fashioned. Additional instructions, said Moist. And would you mind telling me exactly what his additional instructions are? Yes. The patrician blew a speck of dust off a little stone troll and put it back on its square. And? Said Moist after a pause. Veterinary sighed. Yes, I would mind telling you exactly what they are. You have no rights in this matter. We have impounded your horse, by the way, since it was used in the committing of a crime. This is cruel and unusual punishment, said Moist. Indeed, said Veterinary. I offer you a light desk job, comparative freedom of movement, working in the fresh air. No, I feel that my offer might well be unusual, but cruel? I think not. However, I believe we do have some down in the cellars. Some ancient punishments which are extremely cruel and in many cases quite unusual, if you would like to try them for the purposes of comparison. And of course, there is always the option of dancing the Cecil two-step. The what? Said Moist. Drumknot leaned down and whispered something in his master's ear. Oh, I apologise, said Veterinary. I meant, of course, the hemp fandango. It is your choice, Mr. Lipvig. There is always a choice, Mr. Lipvig. Oh, and by the way, do you know the second interesting thing about angels? What angels? Said Moist, angry and bewildered. Oh dear, people just don't pay attention, said Veterinary. Remember the first interesting thing about angels I told you yesterday? I expect you were thinking about something else. The second interesting thing about angels, Mr. Lipvig, is that you only ever get one. Dun dun dun. Yeah, so I'd say that was a good start to the book, and that was what captivated me. Because I wanted to see more Lord Veterinary, to be honest, but oh well. But Lipvig's whole bewilderment to his whole situation, it just had me completely captivated. And the bizarre circumstances surrounding it all. And Mr. Pump. I like Mr. Pump. But anyway. Chapter 2. The Post Office. In which we meet the staff, the glom of knit, dissertation on rhyming slang. You should have been there. The dead letters. A golem's life. Book of regulations. There was always an angle. There was always a price. There was always a way. And look at it like this, Moist thought. Certain death had been replaced with uncertain death. and that was an improvement, wasn't it? He was free to walk around, well, hobble at the moment. And it was just possible that somewhere in all this was a profit. Well, it could happen. He was good at seeing opportunities where other people saw barren ground. So there was no harm in playing it straight for a few days, yes? It'd give his foot a chance to get better. He could spy out the situation. He could make plans. He might even find out how indestructible golems were. After all, they were made of pottery, weren't they? Things could get broken, maybe. Moist von Lipwig raised his eyes and examined his future. The Ankh-Morpork Central Post Office had a gaunt frontage. It was a building designed for a purpose. It was therefore more or less a big box to employ people in, with 2 wings at the rear which enclosed the big stable yard. Some cheap pillars had been sliced in half and stuck on the outside. Some niches had been carved for some miscellaneous stone nymphs. Some stone urns had been ranged along the parapet, and thus architecture had been created. In appreciation of the thought that had gone into this, the good citizens, or more probably their kids, had covered the walls to a height of 6 feet with graffiti in many exciting colours. In a band all along the top of the frontage, staining the stone in greens and browns, some words had been set in the letters of bronze. Neither rain nor snow nor glom of nit can stay these messengers abot their duty. Moist read aloud. What the hell does that mean? The post office was once a proud institution, said Mr. Pump. And that stuff, Moist pointed. On a board much further down the building, in peeling paint, were the less heroic words, "Don't arsk us about rocks, trolls with sticks, all sorts of dragons, Mrs. Cake, huge green things with teeth, any kinds of black dogs with orange eyebrows, reigns of spaniels, fog, Mrs. Cake." I said it was a proud institution. It was. Specifically, the golem rumbled. Who's Mrs. Cake? I regret I cannot assist you there, Mr. Lipwig. They seem pretty frightened of her. So it appears, Mr. Lipwig. Moist looked around at this busy junction in this busy city. People weren't paying him any attention, although the golem was getting casual glances that didn't appear too friendly. This was all too strange. He'd been, 14? When he'd last used his real name, and heavens knew how long it had been since he'd gone out without some easily removable distinguishing marks. He felt naked and unnoticed. To the interest of no one whatsoever, he walked up the stained steps and turned the key in the lock. To his surprise, it moved easily, and the paint-splattered doors swung open without a creak. There was a rhythmic, hollow noise behind Moist. Mr. Pump was clapping his hands. I can't do that and also read at the same time. Well done, Mr. Lipwig. Your first step in a career of benefit both to yourself and the well-being of the city. Yeah, right, muttered Lipwig. He stepped onto the huge dark lobby, which was lit only dimly by a big but grimy dome in the ceiling. It could never be more than twilight in here, even at noon. The graffiti artists had been at work in here, too. In the gloom, he could see a long, broken counter with doors and pigeonholes behind it. Real pigeonholes. Pigeons were nesting in the pigeonholes. The sour, salty smell of old guano filled the air, and as marble tiles rang under Moist's feet, several hundred pigeons took off frantically and spiraled up towards a broken pane in the roof. Oh shit, he said. Bad language is discouraged, Mr. Lipwig, said Mr. Pump behind him. Why? It's written on the walls. Anyway, it was a description, Mr. Pump. Guano. There must be tons of the stuff. Moist heard his own voice echo back from the distant walls. When was this place last open? 20 years ago. Oh. 20 years ago, Postmaster. Moist looked around. I can do that better. I'm trying to get an old man voice down. 20 years ago, Postmaster. Moist looked around. Who said that? He said. The voice seemed to have come from everywhere. There was the sound of shuffling and the click-clack of a walking stick, and a bent elderly figure appeared in the grey, dead, dusty air.
Groat, sir, it wheezed. Junior Postman Groat, sir. At your service, sir. One word from you, sir, and I will leap, sir. Leap into action, sir.
The figure stopped to cough long and hard, making a noise like a wall being hit repeatedly with a bag of rocks. It does beg the question, why don't most cities use golems as bounty hunters? That's a good question, actually. They seem very efficient in what they do. Moist saw that it had the beard of the short bristled type that suggested that the owner had been interrupted halfway through eating a hedgehog. Junior Postman Groat, he said.
Indeedy, sir. The reason being no one's ever been here long enough to promote me, sir. Should be Senior Postman Groat, sir.
The old man added meaningfully, and once again coughed volcanically. Ex-Postman Groat sounds more like it, Moist thought. Aloud, he said, And you work here, do you?
Aye, sir, that we do, sir. It's just me and the boy now, sir. He's keen, sir. We keeps the place clean, sir, all according to regulations.
Moist could not stop staring. Mr. Groat wore a toupee. There may actually be a man somewhere on whom a toupee works. But whoever that man might be, Mr. Groat was not he. It was chestnut brown, the wrong size, the wrong shape, the wrong style, and all in all, wrong.
I see you're admiring my hair, sir, said Groat proudly as the toupee spun gently. It's all mine, you know, not a prune's.
Prunes? Said Moist.
Sorry, sir, shouldn't have used slang. Prunes as in syrup of prunes, sir. Dimwell slang. Syrup of prunes. Wig. Not many men of my age got all their own hair. I expect that's what you're thinking. It's clean living that does it, inside and out.
Dimwell arithmetic rhyming slang. Various rhyming slangs are known and have given the universe such terms as apples and pears, stairs, rubbity dub, pub, and busy bee, general theory of relativity. The Dimwell Street rhyming slang is probably unique in that it does not in fact rhyme. No one knows why, but theories so far advanced are that 1. That it is quite complex and in fact follows hidden rules, or 2. Dimwell is well named, or 3. It's made up to annoy strangers, which is the case with most such slangs. Moist looked around again at the fetid air and the receding mounds of guano. Well done, he muttered. Well, Mr. Groat, do I have an office, or something? For a moment, the visible face above the ragged beard was that of a rabbit in a headlight.
Oh yes, sir, technically, said the old man quickly. But we don't go there anymore, sir. Oh no, 'cause of the floor. Very unsafe, sir, 'cause of the floor. Could give way any minute, sir. We uses the staff locker room, sir, if you'd care to follow me, sir.
Moist nearly burst out laughing. Fine, he said. He turned to the golem. Mr. Pump.
Yes, Mr. Lipvig, said the golem.
Are you allowed to assist me in any way, or do you just wait around until it's time to hit me on the head?
There is no need for hurtful remarks, sir. I am allowed to render appropriate assistance.
So could you clean out the pigeon shit and let a bit of light in?
Certainly, Mr. Lipvig.
You can?
A golem does not shy away from work, Mr. Lipvig. I will locate a shovel.
Mr. Pump set off towards the distant counter, and the bearded junior postman panicked.
No,
he squeaked, lurching after the golem.
It's really not a good idea to touch them heaps.
Floor's liable to collapse, Mr. Groat, said Moist cheerfully. Groat looked from Moist to the golem, back again. His mouth opened and shut as his brain sought for words. Then he sighed.
You'd better come down to the locker room then. Step this way, gentlemen.
Oh, the Vimes' boots theory, yes. I forget, the Vimes' boots theory of economic... Is it economic... No. Vimes' boots theory of economic fairness, or economic... It's economic something. But I've used that on Smooth a number of times. and tried to explain it to Smooth a number of times. It's very fair and it's very true. In fact, it's one of, I think it's actually recognized as a real thing. Oh, it's the Vimes' Boots theory of socio-economic unfairness. I think. It might just be economic unfairness, but anyway. Moist became aware of the smell of Mr. Grote as he followed the old man. It wasn't a bad smell, as such, just odd. It was vaguely chemical, coupled with the eye-stinging aroma of every type of throat medicine you've ever swallowed, and with just a hint of old potatoes. The locker room turned out to be down some steps into the basement where, presumably, the floors couldn't collapse because there was nothing to collapse into. It was long and narrow. At one end was a monstrous oven which, Moist learned later, had once been part of some kind of heating system, the post office, having been a very advanced building for its time. Now a small round stove, glowing almost cherry red at the base, had been installed alongside it. There was a huge black kettle on it. The air indicated the presence of socks, cheap coal and no ventilation. Some battered wooden lockers were ranged up along one wall, the painted names flaking off. Light got in, eventually, via grimy windows up near the ceiling. Whatever the original purpose of the room, though, it was now the place where two people lived. Two people who got along, but nevertheless had a clear sense of mine and thine. The space was divided into two, with a narrow bed against one wall on each side. The dividing line was painted on the floor, up the walls and across the ceiling. My half, your half. So long as we remember that, the line indicated, there won't be any more trouble. In the middle, so that it bestrode the boundary line, was a table. A couple of mugs and 2 tin plates were carefully arranged at either end. There was a salt pot in the middle of the table. The line of the salt pot turned into a little circle to encompass it in its own demilitarized zone. One half of the narrow room contained an overlarge and untidy bench, piled with jars, bottles, and old papers. It looked like the workspace of a chemist who made it up as he went along, or until it exploded. The other had an old card table on which small boxes and rolls of black felt had been stacked with slightly worrying precision. There was also the largest magnifying glass Moist had ever seen on a stand. That side of the room had been swept clean. The other was a mess that threatened to encroach over the line. Unless one of the scraps of paper from the grubbier side was a funny shape, it seemed that somebody with care and precision, and presumably a razor blade, had cut off the corner of it, which had gone too far. A young man stood in the middle of the clean half of the floor. He'd obviously been waiting for Moist, just like Grote, but he hadn't mastered the art of standing to attention, or rather, had only partly understood it. His right side stood considerably more to attention than his left side, and as a result, he was standing like a banana. Nevertheless, with his huge nervous grin and big gleaming eyes, he radiated keenness quite possibly beyond the boundaries of sanity. There was a definite sense that at any moment he would bite, and he wore a blue cotton shirt on which someone had printed, "Ask me about pins." Yeah, standing like a banana. I know. It's one of my favourite descriptions. Said Moist.
"Apprentice Postman Stanley," mumbled Grote. "Orphan, sir. Very sad. Came to us from the siblings of Offler Charity Home, sir. Both parents passed away of gnats on their farm out in the wild, sir, and he was raised by peas."
Surely you mean on peas, Mr. Grote?
"By peas, sir. Very unusual case. A good lad if he doesn't get upset, but he tends to twist toward the sun, sir, if you get my meaning."
Perhaps, said Moist. He turned hurriedly to Stanley. "So, you know something about pins, do you?" he said, in what he hoped was a jovial voice. "No, sir," said Stanley. He all but saluted. "But your shirt says..." "I know everything about pins, sir," said Stanley. "Everything there is to know." "Well, that's, Moist began. "Every single fact about pins, sir," Stanley went on. "There's not a single thing I don't know about pins. Ask me anything about pins, sir. Anything you like at all, sir. Go on, sir. Well, Moist floundered, but years of practice came to his aid. I wonder how many pins were made in the city last year. He stopped. A change had come across Stanley's face. It smoothed out, lost the vague hint that its owner was about attempting to gnaw off your ear. Last year, the combined workshops or pinneries of Ankh-Morpok turned out 27,880,978 pins, said Stanley, staring into a pin-filled private universe. That includes wax-headed steels, braziers, silver-headed and full silver, extra-large, machine and handmade, reflexed and novelty, but not lapel pins, which should not be grouped with the true pins at all, since they are technically known as sports or blazons, sir. Yes, I think I once saw in a magazine or something, said Moist desperately. It was called, Pins Monthly?
Oh dear,
said Grote behind him. Stanley's face contorted into something that looked like a cat's bottom with a nose. That's for hobbyists, he hissed. They're not true pinheads. They don't care about pins. Oh, they say so, but they have a whole page of needles every month now. Needles? Anyone could collect needles. They're only pins with holes in. Anyway, what about popular needles? But they just don't want to know.
Stanley is the editor of Total Pins, Grote whispered behind Moist.
I don't think I saw that one, Moist began.
Stanley, go and help Mr. Lipvig's assistant find a shovel, will you? Said Grote, raising his voice. Then go and sort your pins again until you feel better. Mr. Lipvig doesn't want to see one of your little moments.
He gave Moist a blank look.
They had an article last month about pin cushions.
Oh, sorry. They had an article last month about pin cushions, muttered Stanley, stamping out the room. The golem followed him.
He's a good lad, said Grote when they had gone. Just a bit cup and plate in the head. Leave him alone with his pins and he's no trouble at all. Gets a bit intense at times, that's all. Oh, and on that subject, there's the third member of our jolly little team, sir.
A large black and white cat had walked into the room. It paid no attention to Moist or Grote, but progressed slowly across the floor toward a battered and unravelling basket. Moist was in the way. The cat continued until its head butted gently against Moist's leg, and it stopped.
That's Mr. Tiddles, sir, said Grote.
Tiddles? Said Moist. You mean that really is a cat's name? I thought it was just a joke.
Not so much of a name, sir. More of a description, said Grote. You'd better move, sir, otherwise he'll just stand there all day. 20 years old he is and a bit set in his ways.
Moist stepped aside. Unperturbed, the cat continued to the basket where it curled up. Is he blind? Said Moist.
No, sir, he has his routine and he sticks to it, sir. Sticks to it to the very second. Very patient for a cat. Doesn't like the furniture being moved. You'll get used to him.
Not knowing what to say, but feeling that he should say something, Moist nodded toward the array of bottles on Grote's bench. You dabble in alchemy, Mr. Grote, he said.
No, sir, I practice natural medicine, said Grote proudly. Don't believe in doctors, sir. Never a day's illness in my life, sir.
He thumped his chest, making a thwap noise not normally associated with living tissue.
Flannettle, goose grease and hot bread pudding, sir. Nothing like it for protecting your tubes against the noxious effluences. It puts a fresh layer on every week, sir, and you won't find a sneeze passing my nose, sir. Very healthful, very natural.
Good, said Moist.
Worst of them all is soap, sir, said Grote, lowering his voice. Terrible stuff, sir. Washes away the beneficent humours. Leave things be, I say. Keep the tubes running, put sulphur in your socks and pay attention to your chest protector, and you can laugh at anything. Now, sir, I'm sure a young man like yourself will be worrying about the state of his...
What's this do? Said Moist hurriedly, picking up a pot of greenish goo.
That, sir. Wart cure. Wonderful stuff. Very natural, not like the stuff a doctor'd give you.
Moist sniffed at the pot. What's it made of?
Arsenic, sir, said Grote calmly.
Arsenic?
Very natural, sir.
said Groat.
And green.
So, Moist thought, as he put the pot back with extreme care inside the post office normality, clearly does not... So, Moist thought, as he put the pot back with extreme care. Inside the post office normality clearly... Oh, there should be a comma here, I'm sure. Inside the post office, normality clearly does not have a one-to-one relationship with the outside world. I might miss the cues. He decided that the role of keen but bewildered manager was the one to play here. Besides, apart from the keen aspect, it didn't need any effort. Can you help me, Mr. Groat? He said. I don't know anything about the post.
Well, sir, what did you used to do?
Rob, trick, forge, embezzle, but never, and this was important, using any kind of violence. Never. Moist had always been very careful about that. He tried not to sneak either if he could avoid it. Being caught at 1 a.m. in a bank deposit vault while wearing a black suit with lots of little pockets in it could be considered suspicious. So why do it? With careful planning, the right suit, the right papers, and above all, the right manager, you could walk into the place at midday, and the manager would hold the door open for you when you left. Palming rings and exploiting the cupidity of rural stupid was just a way of keeping his hand in. It was the face, that's what it was. He had an honest face, and he loved those people who looked him firmly in the eye to see his inner self, because he had a whole set of inner selves, one for every occasion. As for firm handshakes, practice had given him one with which he could moor boats. It was people skills, that was what it was. Special people skills. Before you could sell glass as diamonds, you had to make sure. You had to make people really want to see diamonds. That was the trick of all tricks. You changed the way people saw the world. You let them see it in the way they wanted it to be. How the hell had Vetinari known his name? The man had cracked von Litvig like an egg, and the watch here were demonic. As for setting a golem on the man. I was a clerk, said Moist.
What? Paperwork, that sort of thing?
Said Groat, looking at him intently. Yes, pretty much all paperwork. That was honest if you included playing cards, checks, letters of accreditation, bank drafts and deeds.
Oh, another one, said Groat. Well, there's not a lot to do. We can shove up and make room for you in here, no problem.
But I am supposed to make it work again as it used to, Mr. Groat.
Yeah, right,
said the old man.
You just come along with me then, Postmaster. I reckon there's one or two things you ain't been told.
He led the way back out, back into the dingy main hall, a little trail of yellow powder leaking from his boots.
My dad used to bring me here when I was a lad, he said. A lot of families were post office families in those days. They had them big glass drippy tinkling things up on the ceiling, right, for lights?
Chandeliers, Moist suggested.
Yep, probably, said Groat. 2 of them. And there was brass and copper everywhere, polished up like gold. There were balconies, sir, all round the big hall of every floor, made of iron like lace. And all the counters were made of rare wood, my dad said. And people, this place was packed. The doors never stopped swinging. Even at night. Oh, at night, sir, out in the big backyard, you should have been there. The lights, the coaches coming and going, the horses steaming. Oh, sir, you should have seen it, sir. The men running the teams out. They had this thing, sir. This device, you could get a coach in and out of the yard in 1 minute, sir. 1 minute! The bustle, sir, the bustle and fuss. They said you could come here from Dolly Sisters or even down in the shambles and post a letter to yourself. And you'd have to run like the blazes, sir, the very blazes, sir, to beat the postman to your door. And the uniforms, sir. Royal blue with brass buttons. You should have seen them. And
Moist looked over the babbling man's shoulder to the nearest mountain of pigeon guano, where Mr. Pump had paused in his digging. The golem had been prodding at the fetid, horrible mess, and as Moist watched him, he straightened up and headed towards them with something in his hand.
And when the big coaches came in, sir, all the way from the mountains, you could hear the horns miles away. You should have heard them, sir. And if any bandits tried anything, there was men we had who went out and...
Yes, Mr. Pump, said Moist, halting Groat in mid-history. A surprising discovery, Postmaster. The mounds are not, as I surmised, made of pigeon dung.
No pigeons could achieve that amount in thousands of years, sir.
Well, what are they made of then?
Letters, sir, said the golem.
Moist looked down at Groat, who shifted uneasily.
Ah, yes, said the old man. I was coming to that.
Letters. There was no end to them. They filled every room of the building and spilled out into the corridors. It was technically true that the postmaster's office was unusable because of the state of the floor. It was 12 feet deep in letters. Whole corridors were blocked off with them. Cupboards had been stuffed full with them. To open a door incautiously was to be buried in an avalanche of yellowing envelopes. Floorboards bulged suspiciously upwards. Through cracks in a sagging ceiling plaster, paper protruded. The sorting room, almost as big as the main hall, had drifts reaching to 20 feet in places. Here and there, filing cabinets rose out of the paper sea like icebergs. After half an hour of exploration, Moist wanted a bath. It was like walking through desert tombs. He felt like he was choking on the smell of yellow paper, as though his throat was filled with yellow dust.
I was told we had an apartment here, he croaked. Yes, sir, said Groat. Me and the lad had a look for it the other day. I heard that it was the other side of your office, so I went... So the lad went in on the end of a rope, sir. He said he felt a door, sir, but he'd sunk 6 feet under the mail by then, and he was suffering, sir. Suffering. So I pulled him out.
The whole place is full of undelivered mail. They were back in the locker room. Groat had topped up the black kettle from a pan of water, and it was steaming. At the far end of the room, sitting at his neat little table, Stanley was counting his pins.
Pretty much, sir, except in the basement and the stables, said the old man, washing a couple of tin mugs in the bowl of not very clean water.
You mean even my office is full of old mail, but they never filled the basement?
Where's the sense
in that?
Oh, you couldn't use the basement, sir. Oh, not the basement, said Groat, looking shocked. It's far too damp down there. The letters would be destroyed in no time.
Destroyed, said Moist flatly.
Nothing like damp for destroying things, sir, said Groat, nodding sagely.
Destroying mail from dead people to dead people, said Moist in the same flat voice.
We don't know that, sir, said the old man. I mean, we've got no actual proof.
Well, no. After all, some of these envelopes are only 100 years old, said Moist. He had a headache from the dust and a sore throat from the dryness, and there was something about the old man that was grating on his raw nerves. He was keeping something back.
That's no time at all to some...
That's no time at all to some people. I bet there's... God damn it. Apologies. That's no time at all to some people. I bet the zombie and vampire population are still waiting by the letterbox every day, right?
No need to be like that, sir, said Groat levelly. No need to be like that. You can't just destroy the letters. You just can't do that, sir. That's tampering with the mail, sir. That's not just a crime, sir. That's a...
Sin, said Moist.
Oh, worse than a sin, said Groat, almost sneering. For sins, you're only in trouble with a god, but in my day, if you interfered with the mail, you'd be up against Chief Postal Inspector Rumbelow. Ha! And there's a big difference. Gods forgive.
Moist sought for sanity in the wrinkled face opposite him. The unkempt beard was streaked with different colours, either of dirt, tea, or random celestial pigment. Like some hermit, he thought. Only a hermit could wear a wig like that. Sorry, he said. And you mean that shoving someone's letter under the floorboards for 100 years isn't tampering with it? Groat suddenly looked wretched. The beard quivered, and he started to cough. Great hacking, wooden cracking lumps of cough that made the jars shake and caused a yellow mist to rise from his trouser bottoms.
Excuse me for a moment, sir,
he wheezed between hacks, and he fumbled in his pocket for a scratched and battered tin.
You suck at all, sir, he said, tears rolling down his cheeks. He proffered the tin to Moist. They're number 3, sir. Very mild. I take 'em myself, sir. Natural remedies from natural ingredients. That's my style, sir. Gotta keep the tubes clean, sir, otherwise they turn against you.
Moist took a large violet lozenge from the box and sniffed it. It smelled faintly of aniseed. Thank you, Mr. Grote, he said, but in case this counted as an attempt at... Thank you, Mr. Grote, he said. But in case this counted an attempt in bribery, he added sternly. The mail, Mr. Grote, sticking undelivered mail wherever there's a space isn't tampering with it.
That's more delaying the mail, sir. Just, slowing it down a bit. It's not like there's ever an intention of never delivering it, sir.
Moist stared at Grote's worried expression. He felt that a sense of shifting ground you experience when you realise that you're dealing with someone whose world is connected with your own only by their fingertips. Not a hermit, he thought, more like a shipwrecked mariner, living in this dry desert island of a building while the world outside moves on and all sanity evaporates. Mr. Grote, I don't want you to, upset you or anything, but there's thousands of letters out there under a thick layer of pigeon guano, he said slowly.
Actually, on that score, sir, things aren't as bad as they seem,
Grote said and paused to suck noisily on his natural cough lozenge.
It's very dry stuff, pigeon doings, and forms quite a hard protective crust on the envelopes.
Why are they all here, Mr. Grote? Said Moist. People skills, he remembered. You're not allowed to shake him. Quality ASMR. The sloppy slapping noises. The junior postman avoided his gaze.
Well, you know how it is, he tried.
No, Mr. Grote, I don't think I do.
Well, maybe a man's busy. Got a full round. Maybe it's Hog's Watch. Lots of cards, see, and the inspector is after him about his timekeeping, and so maybe he just shoves half a bag of letters somewhere safe. But he will deliver 'em, right? I mean, it's not his fault if they keeps pushing him, sir. Pushing him all the time. Then it's tomorrow and he's got an even bigger bag because they're pushing all the time, so he reckons. So I'll just drop a few off today too because it's my day off on Thursday and I can catch up then. But you see, by Thursday he's behind more in a day's work because he keeps on pushing and he's tired anyway. Tired as the dogs, so he says to himself, got some leave coming up soon. But he gets his leave and by then, well, it's all got very nasty towards the end. There was unpleasantness. We'd gone too far, sir. That's what it was. We'd tried too hard. Sometimes things smash so bad it's better to leave it alone than try to pick up the pieces. I mean, where would you start?
I think I get the picture, said Moist. You're lying, Mr. Grote. You're lying by omission. You're not telling me everything. And what you're not telling me is very important, isn't it? I've turned lying into an art, Mr. Grote. And you're just you're just a talented amateur. Grote's face, unaware of the internal monologue, managed a smile. Hey, Ayuna, how you doing? But the trouble is, what's your first name, Mr. Grote? Moist asked.
Tolliver, sir.
Nice name. The thing is, Tolliver, that the picture I see in your description is what I might refer to for the purposes of this analogy as a cameo, whereas all this, Moist waved his hand to include the building and everything it contained, is a full-sized triptych showing scenes from history, the creation of the world and the disposition of gods, with a matching chapel ceiling portraying the glorious firmament and a sketch of a lady with a weird smile thrown in for good measure. Tolliver, I think you are not being frank with me.
Sorry about that, sir,
said Grote, eyeing him with a sort of nervous defiance. I could have you sacked, you know, said Moist, knowing that this was a stupid thing to say.
You could, sir. You could try doing that, said Grote quietly and slowly. But I'm all you got apart from the post lad. And you don't know nothing about the post office, sir. You don't know nothing about the regulations neither. I'm the only one that knows what needs doing round here. You wouldn't last 5 minutes without me, sir. You wouldn't even see the inkwells get filled every day.
Inkwells? Filling inkwells, said Moist. This is just an old building full of dead paper. We have no customers.
Got to keep the inkwells filled, sir. Post office regulations,
said Groat in a steely voice.
Got to follow regulations, sir.
For what? It appears we don't accept any mail or deliver any mail. We just sit here.
No, sir, we don't just sit here, said Groat patiently. We follow the post office regulations. Fill the inkwells, polish the brass.
You don't even sweep up the pigeon shit.
Oddly enough, that's not in the regulations, sir, said the old man. Truth is, sir, no one wants us anymore. It's all the clacks now. The damn clacks. Clack, clack, clack. Everyone's got a clacks tower now, sir. That's the fashion. Fast as the speed of light, they say. Ah, it's got no soul, sir. No heart. I hates 'em. But we're ready, sir. If there was any mail, we'd deal with it, sir. We'd spring into action, sir. Spring into action. But there ain't.
Of course there isn't. It's clearly sunk into this town long ago that you might as well throw your letters away as give them to the post office.
No, sir, wrong again. They're all kept, sir. That's what we do, sir. We keep things as they are, sir. We try not to disturb things, sir, said Groat quietly. We try not to disturb anything.
The way he said it made Moist hesitate. What kind of anything? He said.
Oh, nothing, sir. We just go carefully.
Moist looked around the room. Did it appear smaller? Did the shadows deepen and lengthen? Was there a sudden cold sensation in the air? No, there wasn't, but an opportunity had definitely been missed. Moist felt. The hairs on the back of his neck were rising. Moist had heard that this was because men had been made out of monkeys, and it meant there was a tiger behind you. It is the 90s and there is time for clacks. I don't even know what that means. I have no idea what that is. So yeah, I have no idea what you're referencing, Smooth. As usual. In fact, Mr. Pump was behind him, just standing there, eyes burning more brightly than any tiger had ever managed. That was worse. Tigers couldn't follow you across the sea. They had to sleep. He gave up. Mr. Groat was in some strange, musty little world of his own. Do you call this a life? He said. For the first time in this conversation, Mr. Groat looked him squarely in the eye.
Much better than a death, sir, he said.
Mr. Pump followed Moist across the main hall and out of the main doors, at which point Moist turned on him. All right, what are the rules here? He demanded. Are you going to follow me everywhere? You know I can't run. You are allowed autonomous movement within the city and environs, the golem rumbled. But until you are settled in, I am also instructed to accompany you for your own protection. Against who? Someone annoyed that their great-granddaddy's mail didn't turn up? I couldn't say, sir. I need some fresh air. What happened in here? Why is it so creepy? What happened to the post office? I couldn't say, sir, said Mr. Pump placidly. You don't know? But it's your city, said Moist sarcastically. Have you been stuck at the bottom of a hole in the ground for the last 100 years? No, Mr. Lipvig, said the golem. Well, why can't... It was 240 years, Mr. Lipvig, said the golem. What was? The time I spent living at the bottom of the hole in the ground, Mr. Lipvig. What are you talking about? Said Moist. Why, the time I spent at the bottom of the hole in the ground, Mr. Lipvig. Pump is not my name, Mr. Lipvig. It is my description. Pump. Pump 19 to be precise. I stood at the bottom of a hole for 100 feet deep and pumped water for 240 years, Mr. Lipvig. But now I am ambulating in the sunlight. This is better, Mr. Lipvig. This is better. Oh yeah, I know what a clacks is. But I'm wondering what Smooth's getting at by it's 90s and time for clacks. I have no idea. That night, Moist lay staring at the ceiling. It was 3 feet away from him. Hanging from it, a little distance away, was a candle and a safety lantern. Stanley had been insistent about that, and no wonder. This place would go up like a bomb. It was the boy who'd showed him in here. Grote was sulking somewhere. He'd been right, damn him. He needed Grote. Grote practically was the post office. It had been a long day, and Moist hadn't slept well last night. What with being upside down over Mr. Pump's shoulder, and occasionally kicked by the frantic horse. He didn't want to sleep here either. Heavens knew, but he didn't have lodgings he could use anymore, and they were at a premium in this hive of a city in any case. The locker room did not appeal, no, not at all. So he simply scrambled onto the pile of dead letters, in what was, in theory, his office. It was no great hardship. A man of affairs such as he had to learn to sleep in all kinds of situations, often while mobs were looking for him, a wall's thickness away. At least the heaps of letters were dry and warm and weren't carrying edged weapons. A 90s arcade game. Well, now I know. Paper crackled underneath him as he tried to get comfortable. Idly, he picked up a letter at random. It was addressed to someone called Antimony Parker at 1 Lobbin Clout, and on the back, in capitals, was SWALK. He eased it open with a fingernail. The paper inside all but crumbled at his touch. My very dearest Timothy. Yes, why should a woman, sensible of the great honour that a man is doing her, play the coy minx at such a time? I know you have spoken to Papa, and I of course consent to becoming the wife of the kindest, most wonderful... Moist glanced at the date on the letter. It had been written 41 years ago. He was not, as a rule, given to introspection, it being a major drawback in his line of work, but he couldn't help wondering if, he glanced back at the letter, your loving Agnathea had ever married Antimony, or whether the romance had died right here in this graveyard of paper. He shivered and tucked the envelope, back into his jacket. He'd have to ask Grote what swalk meant. Mr. Pump, he shouted. There was a faint rumble from the corner of the room where the golem stood, waist deep in the mail. Yes, Mr. Lipvig. Is there no way you can shut your eyes? I can't sleep with two red glowing eyes watching me. It's a childhood thing. Sorry, Mr. Lipvig. I could turn my back. That won't work. I'd still know they're there. Anyway, the glow reflects off the wall. Look, where would I run to? The golem gave this some thought. I will go and stand in the corridor, Mr. Lipvig, he decided, and began to wade toward the door. You do that, said Moist, and in the morning I want you to find my bedroom, okay? Some of the offices still have space near the ceiling. You can move the letters into there. Mr. Grote does not like the mail to be moved, Mr. Lipvig, the golem rumbled. Mr. Grote is not the postmaster, Mr. Pump. I am. Good gods, the madness is catching, Moist thought as the golem's glow disappeared into the darkness outside. I am not the postmaster. I'm some poor bastard who's the victim of some stupid experiment. What a place! What a situation! What kind of man would put a known criminal in charge of a major branch of government? Apart from, say, the average voter. He tried to find the angle, the way out, but all the time a conversation kept bouncing off the insides of his brain. Imagine a hole, 100 feet deep and full of water. Imagine the darkness. Imagine, at the bottom of the hole, a figure roughly of a human shape, turning in that swirling darkness a massive handle once every 8 seconds. Pump, pump, pump. For 240 years. You didn't mind? Moist had asked. You mean did I harbour resentment, Mr. Lipvig? But I was doing useful and necessary work. Besides, there was much for me to think about. At the bottom of 100 feet of dirty water? What the hell did you find to think about? Pumping, Mr. Lipvig. And then, the golem said, had come secession and dim light, a lowering of levels, a locking of chains, a movement upwards, emergence into a world of light and colour, and other golems. Moist knew something about golems. They used to be baked out of clay thousands of years ago and brought to life by some kind of scroll put inside their heads. And they never wore out, and they worked all the time. You saw them pushing brooms or doing heavy work in timber yards and foundries. Most of them you never saw at all. They made the hidden wheels go round, down in the dark, and that was more or less the limit of his interest in them. They were, almost by definition, honest. But now the golems were freeing themselves. It was the quietest, most socially responsible revolution in history. They were property, and so they saved up and bought themselves. Mr. Pump was buying his freedom by seriously limiting the freedom of Moist. A man could get quite upset about that. Surely that wasn't how freedom was supposed to work. Ye gods, thought Moist. Back in the here and now. No wonder Groat sucked cough sweets all the time. The dust in this place could choke you. He rummaged in his pocket and pulled out the diamond-shaped cough lozenge the old man had given him. It looked harmless enough. 1 minute later, after Mr. Pump had lurched back into the room and slapped him heavily on the back, the steaming lozenge was stuck to the wall on the far side of the room, where, by morning, it had dissolved quite a lot of the plaster. Mr. Groat took a measured spoonful of tincture, of rhubarb and cayenne pepper, to keep the tubes open, and checked that he still had the dead mole round his neck to ward off any sudden attack of doctors. Everyone knew doctors made you ill. It stood to reason. Nature's remedies were the trick every time, not some hellish potion made of God's knew what. God, this is very relevant to the here and now, I feel. In both the aspect of government criminals and also doctors and natural remedies. And the healthy immune system. Anyway. He smacked his lips appreciatively. He'd put fresh sulphur in his socks tonight too, and he could feel it doing him good. 2 candle lanterns glowed in the velvet papery darkness of the main sorting office. The light was shining through the outer glass, filled with water so that the candles would go out if it was dropped. It made the lanterns look like the lights of some abyssal fish from the squiddy iron-hard depths. There was a little glugging noise in the dark. Groat corked his bottle of elixir and got on with business.
"Be the inkwells filled, apprentice postman Stanley?" he intoned.
Aye, Junior Postman Groat. Aye, Junior Postman Groat. Full to the depth of 1/3 of 1 inch from the top as per Post Office Counter Regulations, Daily Observances Rule C-18, said Stanley. There was a rustle as Groat turned the pages of a huge book on the lectern in front of him. Can I see the picture, Mr. Groat? Said Stanley eagerly. Groat smiled. It had become part of the ceremony, and he gave the reply that he gave every time.
"Very well, but this is the last time. It's not good to look at it too often on the face of a god," he said. "Or any other part."
But you said there used to be a gold statue of him in the big hall, Mr. Groat. People must have looked on it all the time. Groat hesitated, but Stanley was a growing lad. He'd have to know sooner or later. Mind you, I don't reckon people used to look on the face much, he said. They looked more on the wings. On his hats and ankles, said Stanley, so he could fly messages at the speed of messages. A little bead of sweat dropped off Groat's forehead.
"Mostly on his hat and ankles, yes," he said. But not only there."
Stanley peered at the picture. "Oh yes, I never noticed them before. He's got wings on..."
"The fig leaf," said Groat quickly. "That's what we call it."
"Why's he got a leaf there?" said Stanley.
"Oh, they all had 'em in the olden days, 'cause of being classical," said Groat, relieved to be shifting away from the heart of the matter. "It's a fig leaf off a fig tree."
"Ha ha! Joke's on them! There's no fig trees round here!" said Stanley, in the manner of one exposing the flaw in a long-held dogma.
"Yes, lad, very good, but it was a tin one anyway," said Groat with patience.
"And the wings?" said the boy.
"Well, I suppose they thought that the more wings, the better," said Groat.
"Yes, but supposing his hat wings and his ankle wings stopped working, he'd be held up by..."
"Stanley! It's just a statue. Don't get excited. Calm down. You don't want to upset them."
Stanley hung his head. "They've been whispering to me again, Mr. Groat. He confided in a low voice.
"Yes, Stanley. They whisper to me too."
"I remember him last time talking in the night, Mr. Groat," said Stanley, his voice trembling. "I shut my eyes and I keep seeing the writing."
Yes, Stanley, don't worry about it. Try not to think about it. It's Mr. Lipstick's fault, stirring them up. Leave well alone, I say. They never listen, and then what happens? They find out the hard way.
It seems like only yesterday there was watchmen drawing the chalk outline around Mr. Mutable, said Stanley, beginning to tremble. He found out the hard way.
Calm down now, calm down, said Groat, patting him on the shoulder. You'll set him off. Think about pins.
But it's a cruel shame, Mr. Groat. Them never being alive long enough to make you senior postman.
Groat sniffed. Oh, that's enough of that. That's not important, Stanley, he said, his face like thunder.
Yes, Mr. Groat, but you're an old man and you're still only a junior postman, Stanley persisted.
I said that's enough, Stanley. Now just raise that lamp again, will you? Good, that's better. I'll read a page of the regulations. That quiets them down.
Groat cleared his throat.
I shall now read from the Book of Regulations, Delivery Times, Metropolitan, Sundays and Octadays accepted, he announced to the air. As follows, the hours by which letters should be put into the receiving houses in town for each delivery within the city walls of Ankh-Morpork are as of the following. Overnight by 8 o'clock in the evening for the first delivery. Morning by 8 o'clock for the second delivery. Morning by 10 o'clock for the third delivery. Morning by 12 o'clock for the fourth delivery. Afternoon by 2 o'clock for the fifth delivery. Afternoon by 4 o'clock for the sixth delivery. Afternoon by 6 o'clock for the seventh delivery. These are the hours and I have read them.
Groat hung his head for a moment, and then he closed the book with a snap. Why are we doing this, Mr. Groat? Said Stanley meekly.
'Cause of hubris,
said Mr. Groat.
That's what it was. Hubris killed the post office. Hubris and greed and bloody stupid Johnson and the new pie.
A pie, Mr. Groat? How could a pie...
Don't ask, Stanley. It gets complicated and there's nothing in it about pins.
They put out the candles and left. When they had gone, a faint whispering started. And now we see the darkness within the post office. A concerning development. And I'm going to just tighten this a second because it's starting to come loose and that's not good. God, I'm always worried that this thing's just going to fall off and break or land in my lap. Sorry. And also, I don't know why it keeps on moving in the first place. Nope, 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 nope. I really don't. Oh well, fuck it. That seems tight enough to me. I'm hoping, anyway. Okay. Chapter 3. Our Own Hand or None. In which our hero discovers the world of pins, the greengrocer's apostrophe, Swalk, the business of fate, the golem lady, the business of business and the nature of freedom once again discussed. Clerk Brian shows enthusiasm. I always like these little, footnotes at the top of the page, or whatever you'd call them. Little I don't even think they're subtitles. Maybe they're subtitles, but I just like it because you know what's coming up. And then when it actually does come up, you can be like, oh, that's what it meant. That's the context. Rise and shine, Mr. Lipvig. Your second day as postmaster. Moist opened one crusted eye and glared at the golem. Oh, so you're an alarm clock too, he said. Ah, my tongue. Feels like it was caught in a mousetrap. He half crawled, half rolled across the bed of letters and managed to stand up just outside the door. I need new clothes, he said. And food. And a toothbrush. I'm going out, Mr. Pump. You are to stay here. Do something. Tidy the place up. Get rid of the graffiti on the walls, will you? At least we can make the place look clean.
Anything you say, Mr. Lipvig.
Right, said Moist, and strode off for one stride, and then yelped.
Be careful of your ankle, Mr. Lipvig, said Mr. Pump.
And another thing, said Moist, hopping on one leg. How can you follow me? How can you possibly know where I am?
Karmic signature, Mr. Lipvig, said the golem.
And that means what exactly? Moist demanded.
It means I know exactly where you are, Mr. Lipvig.
The pottery face was impassive. Moist gave up. He limped out into what, for this city, was a fresh new morning. There had been a touch of frost overnight, just enough to put some zest into the air and give him an appetite. The leg still hurt, but at least he didn't need the crutch today. Here was Moist von Lipvig walking through the city. He'd never done that before. The late Albert Spangler had, and so had Mundo Smith, and Edward Streep, and half a dozen other personas that he'd donned and discarded. Oh, he'd been moist inside. What a name, yes, he'd heard every possible joke. But they had been on the outside, between him and the world. Edwin Streep had been a work of art. He'd been a lack of confidence trickster, and needed to be noticed. He was so patently, obviously bad at running a bent fine lady game, and other street scams that people positively queued up to trick the dumb trickster, and then walked away grinning, right up to the point when they tried to spend the coins they'd scooped up so quickly. There's a secret art to forgery, and Moist had discovered it. In a hurry, or when excited, people will complete the forgery by their own cupidity. They'll be so keen to snatch the money from the obvious idiot that their own eyes fill in the little details that aren't quite there on the coins they so quickly pocket. All you needed to do was hint at them. But that was just for starters. Some customers never even discovered that they'd put the fake coins in their purse, thus revealing to the incompetent Streep in which pocket they'd kept it. Later on, they learned that Streep might be rubbish with a deck of cards, but also that this lack was more than made up for by his exceptional skill as a pickpocket. Now Moist felt like a peeled prawn. He felt as though he'd stepped out naked, and yet still no one was taking any notice. There were no cries of, "Hey, you!" No shouts of, "That's him!" He was just another face in the crowd. It was a strange new feeling. He'd never really had to be himself before. He celebrated by buying a street directory from the Guild of Merchants and had a coffee and a bacon sandwich while he thumbed greasily through it for a list of bars. He didn't find what he was looking for in there, but he did find it in the list of hairdressers and grinned when he did so. It was nice to be right. He also found a mention of Dave's pin exchange up in Dolly Sisters in an alley between a house of negotiable affection and a massage parlour. It bought and sold pins to pin fanciers. Moist finished his coffee with a look on his face, which those who knew him well, a group consisting, in fact, of absolutely nobody, would have recognised as the formation of a plan. Ultimately, everything was all about people. If he was going to be staying here for a while, he'd make himself comfortable. He went for a walk to the self-styled home of Acuphilia. It was like lifting an unregarded stone and finding a whole new world. Dave's Pin Exchange was the kind of small shop, where the owner knows every single one of his customers by name. It was a wonderful world, the world of pins. It was a hobby that could last you a lifetime. Moist knew this because he expended $1 on pins by J. Langu Owlsbury, apparently the last word on the subject. Everyone had their funny little ways, Moist conceded, but he wasn't entirely at home among people who, if they saw a pin-up, would pay attention to the pins. Some of the customers browsing the book racks. Misdraws, double pointers and flaws, pins of Uberwald and Genua, first steps in pins, adventures in Acuphilia, and staring covetously at the rack of pins laid out under glass, had an intensity of expression that frightened him. They looked a bit like Stanley. They were all male. Clearly, women weren't natural pinheads. He found Total Pins on the bottom rack. It had a smudgy, home-produced look, and the print was small and dense and lacked such subtleties as paragraphs and, in many cases, punctuation. The common comma had looked at Stanley's expression and decided not to disturb him. When Moist put the little magazine on the counter of the shop's owner, a huge bearded man with dreadlocks, a pin through his nose, a beer belly belonging to 3 other people, and the words death or pins tattooed on a bicep, picked it up and tossed it back down dismissively.
Sure about that, sir? He said. We've got pins monthly. New pins, practical pins, modern pins, pins extra, pins international, talking pins, pins world, world pins, world of pins, pins and pinneries.
Moist's attention wandered off for a while, but came back in time to catch
the Actiophile Digest, Extreme Pins, Tifte. That's from Uberwald. Very good if you collect foreign pins. Beginning pins, that's a part work, sir, with a new pin every week. Pin times and, here the big man winked, back alley pins.
I noticed that one, said Moist. It has lots of pictures of young women in leather.
Yes, sir, but to be fair, they're generally holding pins. So then, it's total pins for you, is it?
He added, as if giving a fool one last chance to repent of his folly. Yes, said Moist. What's wrong with it?
Oh, nothing at all.
Dave scratched his stomach thoughtfully.
It's just that the editor is a bit
A bit what? Said Moist.
Well, we think he's a bit weird about pins, to tell you the truth.
Moist looked around the shop. Really? He said. Moist went to a nearby cafe and leafed through the magazine. One of the skills of his previous life had been an ability to pick up just enough about anything to sound like an expert, at least to non-experts. Then he returned to the shop. Everyone had their levers. Often it was greed. Greed was a reliable old standby. Sometimes it was pride. That was Groat's lever. He desperately wanted a promotion. You could see it in his eyes. Find the lever, and then it was plain sailing. Stanley now. Stanley would be easy. Big Dave was examining a pin under a microscope when Moist returned to the shop. The rush hour for pin buying must have been nearly over, because there were only a few laggards ogling the pins under glass or thumbing through the racks. Moist sidled over to the counter and coughed.
Yes, sir,
said Big Dave, looking up from his work.
Back again, eh? They get to you, don't they? Seen anything you like?
A packet of pre-perforated pin papers and a 10-penny Lucky Dip bag, please, said Moist loudly. The other customers looked up for a moment as Dave pulled the packets off the rack and then looked down again. Moist leaned over the counter. I was wondering, he whispered hoarsely, if you've got anything a bit, sharper. The big man gave him a carefully blank look.
How do you mean, sharper? He said.
You know, said Moist. He cleared his throat. More pointed. The doorbell jangled as the last of the customers sated on pins for one day stepped out. Dave watched them go and then turned his attention back to Moist.
A bit of a connoisseur, are we, sir?
He said, winking. A serious student, said Moist. Most of the stuff here, well...
I don't touch nails, said Dave sharply. Won't have them in the shop. I've a reputation to think about. Little kids coming here, you know.
Oh no, strictly pins, that's me, said Moist hastily.
Good,
said Dave, relaxing.
As it happens, I might have 1 or 2 items for the genuine collector.
He nodded towards a beaded curtain at the back of the shop.
Can't put everything on display, not with youngsters around, you know how it is.
Moist followed him through the clashing curtain and into the crowded little room behind, where Dave, after looking around conspiratorially, pulled a small black box off a shelf and flipped it open under Moist's nose.
Not something you find every day, eh?
Said Dave. Gosh, it's a pin, thought Moist, but said, wow, in a tone of well-crafted genuine surprise. A few minutes later, he stepped out of the shop, fighting an impulse to turn his collar up. That was the problem with certain kinds of insanity. They could strike at any time. After all, he'd just spent $70 dollars on a damn pin. He stared at the little packets in his hand and sighed. As he carefully put them in his jacket pocket, his hand touched something papery. Oh yes, the Swalk letter. He was about to shove it back when his eye caught sight of the ancient street sign opposite, Lobbin Clout, and as his gaze moved down it, also saw, over the first shop in the narrow street,
Number 1. A. Parker and Sons Greengrocers. High-class fruits and vegetables. Well, why not deliver it? Ha! He was the postmaster, wasn't he? What harm could it do? He slipped into the shop. A middle-aged man was introducing fresh carrots, or possibly carrots, into the life of a bulky woman with a big shopping bag and hairy warts. "Mr. Antimony Parker," said Moist urgently. "Be with you in just 1 moment, sir. The man began. "I just need to know if you are Mr. Antimony Parker, that's all," said Moist. The woman turned to glare at the intruder, and Moist gave her a smile so winning that she blushed and wished just for a moment she'd worn makeup today. "That's father," said the greengrocer. "He's out for the back, tackling a difficult cabbage." "This is his," said Moist. "Postal delivery." He put the envelope on the counter and walked quickly out of the shop. Shopkeeper and customer stared down at the pink envelope. "Swalk," said Mr. Parker. "Oh, that takes me back, Mr. Parker," said the woman. "In my day, we used to put that on our letters when we were courting. Didn't you? Sealed with a loving kiss. There was Swalk. And Lancre. And," she lowered her voice and giggled, "Clatch. Of course, remember?" "All that passed me by, Mrs. Goodbody," said the greengrocer stiffly. "And if it means young men are sending, So this bit screws me up a bit because every single time there's an S in this guy's dialogue, it has an apostrophe after it like it's possessive. So, high classes, fruits and vegetables. And so on. So, anyway. "And if it means young men are sending our dad pink envelopes with swalk on them, I'm thankful for that. Modern times, eh?" He turned and raised his voice. "Father!" Well, that was a good deed for the day, Moist thought. Or a deed, in any case. It looked as though Mr. Parker had managed to acquire some sons, one way or another. Still, it was odd to think that all those letters heaped in that old building. You could imagine them as little packets of history. Deliver them, and history went one way. But if you dropped them in the gap between the floorboards, it went the other. Ha! He shook his head, as if one tiny choice by someone unimportant could make that much difference. History had to be a bit tougher than that. It all sprang back eventually, didn't it? He was sure he'd read that somewhere. Something like that. If it wasn't like that, no one would ever dare do anything. He stood in the little square where 8 roads met, and chose to go home via Market Street. It was as good a way as any other. When he was sure that both Stanley and the Golem were busy on the Mail Mountains, Mr. Grote crept away through the labyrinth of corridors. Bundles of letters were stacked so high and tightly that it was all he could do to squeeze through. But at last he reached the shaft of the old hydraulic elevator, long disused. The shaft had been filled up with letters. However, the engineer's ladder was still clear, and that at least went up to the roof. Of course, there was the fire escape outside, but that was outside, and Grote was not over keen on going outside at the best of times. He inhabited the post office like a very small snail in a very large shell. He was used to gloom. Now, slowly and painfully, his legs shaking, he climbed up through the floors of mail and forced open the trapdoor to the top. He blinked and shuddered in the unfamiliar sunlight and hauled himself out onto the flat roof. He'd never really liked doing this, but what else could he have done? Stanley ate like a bird, and Grote mostly got by on tea and biscuits. But it all cost money, even if you went around the markets, just as they closed up, and somewhere in the past, decades ago, the pay had stopped arriving. Grote had been too frightened to go up to the palace to find out why. He was afraid that if he asked for the money, he'd be sacked. So he'd taken to renting out the old pigeon loft. What was the harm in that? All the pigeons had joined their feral brethren years ago, and a decent shed was not to be sneezed at in this city, even if it did whiff a bit. There was an outside fire escape and everything. It was a little palace compared to most lodgings. Besides, these lads didn't mind the smell, they said. They were pigeon fanciers. Grote wasn't sure what that entailed, except that they had to use a little clacks tower to fancy them properly. But they paid up, that was the important thing. He skirted the big rainwater tank for the defunct lift and sidled around the rooftops to the shed, where he knocked politely. It's me, lads. Just come about the rent, he said.
The door was opened and he heard a snatch of conversation.
The linkages won't stand for more than 30 seconds.
Oh, Mr. Grote, come on in, said the man who had opened the door. This was Mr. Carlton. Oh, shit. The one with the bearded dwarf we'd be proud of. No, 2 dwarves we'd be proud of. He seemed more sensible than the other 2, although this was not hard. Grote removed his hat.
Come about the rent, sir, he repeated, peering around the man. Got a bit of news too, just thought I'd better mention. Lads, we've got a new postmaster. If you could be a bit careful for a while. A nod's as good as a wink, eh?
How long's this one gonna last then? Said a man who was sitting on the floor working on a big metal drum full of what, to Mr. Grote, appeared to be very complicated clockwork. You'll push him off the roof by Saturday night.
Now, Mr. Winton, there's no call to make fun of me like that, said Mr. Grote nervously. Once he's been here a few weeks and got settled in, I'll kind of hint that you're here, all right? Pigeons getting on okay, are they?
He peered around the loft. Only one pigeon was visible, hunched up high in a corner. They're out for a bit of exercise right now, said Winton.
All right, that'd be it then, said Grote.
Anyway, we're a bit more interested in woodpeckers at the moment, said Winton, pulling a bent metal bar out of the drum. See, Alex, I told you it's bent, and the 2 gears are stripped bare.
Woodpeckers, said Grote.
There was a certain lowering of the temperature, as if he'd heard the wrong thing. That's right, woodpeckers.
Woodpeckers, Mr. Emery?
The 3rd pigeon fancier had always made Grote nervous. It was the way his eyes were always on the move, as if he was trying to see everything at once, and he was always holding a tube with smoke coming out of it, or another piece of machinery. They all seemed very interested in tubes and cogwheels, if it came to that. Oddly enough, Grote had never seen them holding a pigeon. He didn't know how pigeons were fancied, but he assumed that it had to be close up. Yes, woodpeckers, said the man, while the tube in his hand changed colour from red to blue. Because, and here he appeared to stop and think for a moment, we're seeing if they can be taught to... Oh yes, tap out the message when they get there, see? Much better than the messenger pigeons.
Why?
Said Grote. Mr. Emery stared at the whole world for a moment. Because they can deliver messages in the dark, he said. Well done, murmured the man, dismantling the drum.
Oh, that could be a lifesaver, I can see that, said Grote. Can't see it beating the clacks, though.
That's what we want to find out, said Winton. But we'd be very grateful if you didn't tell anyone about this, said Carlton quickly. Here's your $3, Mr. Grote. We wouldn't want other people stealing our idea, you see.
Lips are sealed, lads, said Grote. Don't you worry about it, you can rely on Grote.
Carlton was holding the door open. We know we can. Goodbye, Mr. Grote. Grote heard the door shut behind him as he walked back across the roof. Inside the shed, there seemed to be an argument started. He heard someone say, "What did you have to go and tell him about that for?" That was a bit hurtful, someone thinking that he couldn't be trusted. And as he eased his way down the long ladder, Grote wondered if he ought to have pointed out that woodpeckers wouldn't fly in the dark. It was amazing that bright lads like them hadn't spotted this flaw. They were, he thought, a bit gullible. "100 feet down and a quarter of a mile away as the woodpecker flies during daylight, Moist followed the path of destiny. Currently it was leading him through a neighbourhood that was on the downside of whatever curve you hoped you'd bought your property on the upside of. Graffiti and rubbish were everywhere here. They were everywhere in the city, if it came to that, but elsewhere the garbage was better quality rubbish and the graffiti was close to being correctly spelled. The whole area was waiting for something to happen, like a really bad fire. And then he saw it. It was one of those hopeless little shop fronts that house enterprises with a lifetime measured in days, like giant clearance sale of socks with 2 heels each, tights with three legs and shirts with 1 sleeve 4 feet long. The window was boarded over, but just visible behind the graffiti above it were the words, "The Golem Trust." Moist pushed open the door, glass scrunched under his feet. A voice said, Hands where I can see them, mister! He raised his hands cautiously while peering into the gloom. There was definitely a crossbow being wielded by a dim figure. Such light as had managed to get round the boards glinted off the tip of the bolt. "Oh," said the voice in the dark, as if mildly annoyed that there was no excuse to shoot anybody. "All right then, we had visitors last night." "The window," said Moist. "It happens about once a month. I was just sweeping it up." There was the scratch of a match and the lamp was lit. "They don't generally attack the golems themselves, but not now that there's free ones around. But glass doesn't fight back." The lamp was turned up, revealing a tall young woman in a tight grey woolen dress, with coal black hair plastered down so that she looked like a peg doll, and forced into a tight bun at the back. There was a slight redness to her eyes that suggested she had been crying. "You're lucky to have caught me," she said. "I'd only come in to make sure nothing's been taken. Are you here to sell or to hire? You can put your hands down now," she added, placing the crossbow under the counter. "Sell or hire?" said Moist, lowering his hands with care. "A golem," she said in a talking to the heart of a thinking voice. "We are the Golem Trust. We buy or hire golems. Do you want to sell a golem or hire a golem?" "Neither," said Moist. "I've got a golem. I mean, one is working for me." "Really? Where?" said the woman. "And we can probably speed up a little, I think." "At the post office." "Oh, Pump 19, said the woman. "He said it was a government service." "We call him Mr. Pump," said Moist primly. "Really? And do you get a wonderfully warm, charitable feeling when you do?" "Pardon? What?" said Moist, bewildered. He wasn't sure if he was managing the trick of laughing at him behind her frown. The woman sighed. "Sorry, I'm a bit snappish this morning. A brick landing on your desk does that to you. Let's just say they don't see the world in the same way as we do, okay? They've got feelings in their own way, but they're not like ours. Anyway, how can I help you, Mr. von Lipwig?" said Moist, and added, "Moist von Lipwig," to get the worst over with, but the woman didn't even smile. "Lipwig, small town near Uberwald," she said, picking up the brick from the broken glass and debris on her desk, regarding it critically, then turning to the ancient filing cabinet behind her and filing it under B. "Chief export. It's famous dogs, of course. Second most important export, it's beer. Except during the 2 weeks of Septoberfest, when it exports second-hand beer, probably?" "I don't know. We left when I was just a kid," said Moist. "As far as I'm concerned, it's just a funny name." "Try Adora Belle Deerheart sometime," said the woman. "Ah, that's not a funny name," said Moist. "Quite," said Adora Belle Deerheart. "I now have no sense of humour whatsoever. Well, now that we've been appropriately human towards one another, what exactly was it you wanted?" "Look, the veterinary has sort of lumbered me with Pump 19 as an assistant, but I don't know how to treat..." Moist sought in the woman's eyes for some clue as to the politically correct term and plumped for him. "Huh? Just treat him normally." "You mean normally for a human being, or normally for a pottery man filled with fire?" To Moist's astonishment, Adora Belle Deerheart took a packet of cigarettes out of the desk drawer and lit one. She mistook his expression and proffered him the pack. "Can I rate your waifu?" Dunno. I don't usually rate waifus. It's not something I specialise in. I specialise in reading. Speedwagon? Yeah, I'd say Speedwagon's probably top tier, personally. Mostly because of the meme, though. "No thanks," he said, waving it away. Apart from the occasional old lady with a pipe, he'd never seen a woman smoke before. It was strangely attractive, especially since, as it turned out, she smoked a cigarette as if she had a grudge against it, sucking the smoke down and blowing it out almost immediately. "Well, thank you for the follow. Hope you enjoy being here. I will try and rate future waifus. Yeah, take care. Have a good Ramadan." "You're getting all hung up about it, right?" she said. When Miss Deerheart wasn't smoking, she held the cigarette at shoulder height, the elbow of her left arm cupped in her right hand. There was a definite feel about Adora Belle Deerheart that her lid was only barely holding down an entire womanful of anger. Yes, I mean, ha! It's just like the campaign for equal heights and all that patronising stuff they spout about dwarves, and why we shouldn't use terms like small talk and feeling small. Golems don't have any of our baggage about who am I, why am I here, okay? Because they know. They were made to be tools, to be property, to work. Work is what they do. In a way, it's what they are. End of existential angst. Miss Deerheart inhaled and then blew out the smoke in one nervous movement. And then stupid people go around calling them persons of clay and Mr. Spanner and so on, which they find rather strange. They understand about free will. They also understand that they don't have it. Mind you, once a golem owns it himself, it's a different matter. Own? How does property own itself? Said Moist. You said they save up and buy themselves, of course. Freehold is the only part of the freedom they'll accept. Actually, what happens is that the free golems support the trust. The trust buys golems whenever it can, and the new golems then buy themselves from the trust at cost. It's working well. The free golems earn 24/8, and there's more and more of them. They don't eat, sleep, wear clothes, or understand the concept of leisure. The occasional tube of ceramic cement doesn't cost much. They're buying more golems every month now and paying my wages and the inquitious rent the landlord of this dump is charging because he knows he's renting to golems. They never complain, you know. They pay whatever's asked. They're so patient it could drive you nuts. Tube of ceramic cement, thought Moist. He tried to fix that thought in case it came in useful. But some mental processes were fully occupied with the growing realization of how well some woman could look in a severely plain dress. Surely they can't be damaged, can they? He managed. Certainly they can. A sledgehammer on the right spot would really mess one up. Owned golems will just stand there and take it, but the trust golems are allowed to defend themselves, and when someone weighing a ton snatches a hammer out of your hand, you have to let go really quickly. I think Mr. Pump is allowed to hit people, said Moist. Quite possibly. A lot of the Frees are against that, but others say a tool can't be blamed for the use to which it's put, said Mr. Deerheart. They debate it a lot, for days and days. No rings on her fingers, Moist noted. What kind of attractive girl works for a bunch of clay men? This is all fascinating, he said. Where can I find out more? We do a pamphlet, said almost certainly Miss Deerheart, pulling open a drawer and flipping a thin booklet onto the desk. It's 5 pence. The title on the cover was Common Clay. Moist put down $1. Keep the change, he said. No, said Miss Deerheart, fumbling for coins in the drawer. Did you read what it said over the door? Yes, it said smash the bar studs, said Moist. Miss Deerheart put a hand to her forehead wearily. Oh yes, the painter hasn't been back yet. But underneath that, look, it's on the back of the pamphlet. Moist read it, or at least looked at it. It's one of their own languages, she said. It's all a bit mystic, said to be spoken by angels. It translates as, by our own hand or none. They're fiercely independent, you have no idea. She admires them, Moist thought. Whoo-wee. And angels? Well, thank you, he said. I'd better be going. I'll definitely... Well, thank you anyway. What are you doing at the post office, Mr. von Lipwig? Said the woman, as he opened the door. Call me Moist, said Moist, and a bit of his inner self shuddered. I'm the new postmaster. No kidding, said Miss Deerheart. Then I'm glad you've got Pump 19 with you. The last few postmasters didn't last long, I gather. I think I heard something about that, said Moist cheerfully. It sounds as though things were pretty bad in the olden days. Miss Deerheart's brow wrinkled. Olden days? She said. Last month was olden days. Lord Vetinari stood looking out of his window. His office had once had a wonderful view of the city, and technically it still did, although now the roofline was a forest of clacks towers, winking and twinkling in the sunlight. On the tump, the old castle mound across the river, the big tower, one end of the Grand Trunk that wound more than 2,000 miles across the continent to Genua, glittered with semaphore. It was good to see the lifeblood of trade and commerce and diplomacy pumping so steadily, especially when you employed clerks who were exceptionally good at decryption. White and black by day, light and dark by night, the shutters stopped only for fog and snow. At least until the last few months. He sighed and went back to his desk. There was a file open. It contained a report from Commander Vimes of the City Watch, with a lot of exclamation marks. It also contained a more measured report from Clerk Alfred, and Lord Vetinari had circled the section headed The Smoking New. There was a gentle knock at the door, and the clerk Drumknot came in like a ghost. "The gentlemen from the Grand Trunk Severmore Company are all here now, sir," he said. He laid down several sheets of paper covered in tiny, intricate lines. Vetinari gave the shorthand a cursory glance. "Idle chit-chat," he said. "Yes, my lord, one might say excessively so, but I am certain in the mouth of the speaking tube is quite invisible in the plasterwork, my lord. It's hidden in a gilt cherub most cunningly, sir. Clerk Brian has built it into its cornucopia, which apparently collects more sounds and then can be swiveled to face whoever." "One does not have to see something to know that it is there, Drumknot." Vetinari tapped the paper. "These are not stupid men. Well, some of them at least. You have the files." Drumknot's pale face bore for a moment the pained expression of a man forced to betray the high principles of filing. "In a manner of speaking, my lord, we actually have nothing substantial about any of the allegations. We really haven't. We're running a concludium in the Long Gallery, but it's all hearsay, I'm afraid. There's hints here and there, but really we need something more solid." "There will be an opportunity," said Vetinari. Being an absolute ruler today was not as simple as people thought. At least it was not simple if your ambitions included being an absolute ruler tomorrow. There were subtleties. Oh, you could order men to smash down doors and drag people off to dungeons without trial. But too much of that sort of thing lacked style and anyway was bad for business. Habit forming and very, very dangerous to your health. A thinking tyrant, it seemed to Vetinari, had a much harder job than a ruler raised to power by some idiot vote-yourself-rich system like democracy. At least they could tell the people he was their fault. "We would not normally have started individual folders at this time," Drumknot was agonizing. "You see, I'd merely have referenced them on the daily—" "Your concern is as ever exemplary," said Vetinari. "I see, however, that you have prepared some folders." "Yes, my lord, I have bulked some of them out with copies of Clerk Harold's analysis of pig production in Genua, sir." Drumknot looked unhappily as he handed over the card folders. Deliberate misfiling ran fingernails down the blackboard of his very soul. "Very good," said Vetinari. He put them on his desk, pulled another folder out of a desk drawer to place on top of them, and moved some other papers to cover the small pile. "Now please show our visitors in." "Mr. Slant is with them, my lord," said the clerk. Vetinari smiled a mirthless smile. "How surprising." "And Mr. Researcher Gilt," Drumknot added, watching his master carefully. "Of course," said Vetinari. When the financiers filled in a few minutes later, the conference table at one end of the room was clear and gleaming, except for a paper pad and the pile of files. Vetinari himself was standing at the window again. "Ah, gentlemen, so kind of you to come for this little chat," he said. "I was enjoying the view." He turned round sharply and confronted a row of puzzled faces, except for two. One was grey and belonged to Mr. Slant, who was the most renowned, expensive, and certainly the oldest lawyer in the city. He had been a zombie for many years, although apparently the change in habits between life and death had not been marked. The other face belonged to a man with one eye and one black eye patch, and it smiled like a tiger. "It's particularly refreshing to see the Grand Trunk back in operation," said Vetinari, ignoring that face. "I believe it was shut down all day yesterday."
I was only thinking to myself that it was such a shame, the Grand Trunk being so vital to us all, and so regrettable that there's only one of it. Sadly, I now understand the backers of the new trunk are now in disarray, which of course leaves the Grand Trunk operating in solitary splendor, and your company, gentlemen, unchallenged. Oh, what am I thinking of? Do be seated, gentlemen. He gave Mr. Slant another friendly smile as he took his seat. I don't believe I know all these gentlemen, he said. Mr. Slant sighed. My lord, let me present Mr. Greenium of Ankstow Associates, who is the Grand Trunk Company's treasurer, Mr. Nutmeg of Stow Plains Holdings, Mr. Horsefree of the Ankh-Morpork Mercantile Credit Bank, Mr. Stoley of Ankh Futures, Financial Advisors, and Mr. Gilt. All by himself, said the one-eyed man calmly. Ah, Mr. Reacher Gilt, said Vetinari, looking directly at him. I'm so pleased to meet you at last. You don't come to my parties, my lord, said Gilt. Do excuse me. Affairs of state take up so much of my time, said Lord Vetinari brusquely. We should all make time to unwind, my lord. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, as they say. Several of the assembly paused in their breathing when they heard this, but Vetinari merely looked blank. Interesting, he said. He riffed through the files and opened one of them. Now, my staff have prepared some notes for me, some information available publicly down at the Barbican, he said to the lawyer. Dictatorships, for example. Of course, the mysterious world of finance is a closed, ledger to me, but it seems to me that some of your clients work, as it were, for each other. Yes, my lord, said Slant. Is that normal? Oh, it is quite common for people with particular expense to be on the board of several companies, my lord. Even if the companies are rivals, said Vetinari. There were smiles from around the table. Most of the financiers settled a little more easily in their chairs. The man was clearly a fool about business matters. What did he know about compound interest, eh? He'd been classically educated, and then they remembered his education had been at the Assassin's Guild School and stopped smiling. But Mr. Gilt stared intently at Vetinari. There are ways, extremely honourable ways, of assuring confidentiality and avoiding conflicts of interest, my lord, said Mr. Slant. Ah, this would be... What is it now? The glass ceiling? Said Lord Vetinari brightly. No, my lord. That is something else. I believe you may be thinking about the Agitian Wall, said Mr. Slant smoothly. This carefully and successfully ensures that there will be no breach of confidentiality should, for example, one part of an organization come into possession of privileged information which could conceivably be used by another department for unethical gain. This is fascinating. How does it work exactly? Said Vetinari. People agree to not do it, said Mr. Slant. I'm sorry, I thought you said there is a wall, said Vetinari. That's just a name, my lord, for agreeing not to do it. Ah, and they do, how wonderful! Even though in this case the invisible wall must pass through the middle of their brains. We have a code of conduct, you know, said a voice. All eyes except those belonging to Mr. Slant turned to the speaker, who had been fidgeting in his chair. Mr. Slant was a long-time student of the patrician, and when his subject appeared to be a confused civil servant asking innocent questions, it was time to watch him very closely. I'm very glad to hear it, Mr. Vetinari began. Crispin Horsefree, my lord, and I don't like the tone of your questioning. Hiya, Jen. How you doing? How you feeling? For a moment it seemed that even the chairs themselves edged away from him. Mr. Horsefree was a youngish man, not simply running too, but fat,
vaunting, leaping, and diving towards obesity. He had acquired at 30 an impressive selection of chins, and they now wobbled with angry pride. "I do have a number of other tones," said Lord Ventinari calmly. "Oh, well, I'm glad you're here then. I'm glad I can help you feel better." Mr. Horsefree looked around at his colleagues who were somehow suddenly on the distant horizon. "I just wanted to make it clear that we've done nothing wrong," he muttered. "That's all. There is a code of conduct." "I'm sure I've not suggested that you have done anything wrong," said Lord Ventinari. "However, I shall make a note of what you tell me." He pulled a sheet of paper towards him and wrote, in a careful copperplate hand, "Code of Conduct." The shifting of the paper exposed a file marked Embezzlement. The title was of course upside down to the rest of the group, and since presumably it was not intended to be read by them, they read it. Horsefree even twisted his head for a better view. However, Veterinary went on, "Since the question of wrongdoing has been raised by Mr. Horsefree," and he gave the young man a brief smile, "I am sure you are aware of talk suggesting the conspiracy amongst yourselves to keep rates high and competition non-existent." And in the asterisk it says, "It is wrong to judge by appearances." Despite his expression, which was that of a piglet having a bright idea, and his mode of speech, which might put you in the mind of a small, breathless, neurotic, but ridiculously expensive dog, Mr. Horsefree might well have been a kind, generous, and pious man. In the same way, a man climbing out of your window in a stripy jumper, a mask, and a great hurry might merely be lost on the way to a fancy dress party, and the man in the wig and robes at the focus of the courtroom. Sorry, just reading that bit. I think it's a little bit inappropriate. Well, and the man in the wig and robes at the focus of the courtroom might only be a transvestite who wandered out in the rain. Snap judgments can be so unfair. The sentence came out fast and smooth like a snake's tongue, and the swift flick on the end of it was, and indeed, some rumours about the death of a young Mr. Deerheart last month. A stir among the semicircle of men said that the shoe had been dropped. It wasn't a welcome shoe, but there was a shoe that they had been expecting, and it had just gone thud. "An actionable falsehood," said Mr. Slant. "On the contrary, Mr. Slant," said Veterinary, "merely mentioning to you the existence of a rumour is not actionable, as I am sure you are aware." "There is no proof we had anything to do with the boy's murder," snapped Horsefree. "Ah, so you too have heard people saying that he was murdered," said Veterinary, his eyes on the Reacher Gilt's face. "These rumours just fly around, don't they?" "My lord, people talk," said Slant wearily, "but the facts are that Mr. Deerheart was alone in the tower. No one else went up or down. His safety line was apparently not clipped to anything. It was an accident, as it happens often. Yes, we know people say his fingers were broken, but with a fall of that distance hitting the tower on the way, can that really be surprising? Alas, the Grand Trunk Company is not popular at the moment, and so those scurrilous and baseless accusations are made. As Mr. Horsefree pointed out, there is no evidence whatsoever that what happened was anything more than a tragic accident. And if I may speak frankly, what exactly is the business of calling us here? My clients are very busy men." Veterinary leaned back and placed his fingers together. "Let us consider a situation in which some keen and highly inventive men devise a remarkable system of communication," he said. "What they have is a kind and passionate ingenuity, in large amounts. What they don't have is money. They are not used to money. So they meet some people who introduce them to other people. Friendly people who,
for a 40% stake in the enterprise, give them the much needed cash and, very important, much fatherly advice, and an introduction to a really good firm of accountants. And so they proceed, and soon money is coming in and money is going out, but somehow they learn they're not quite as financially stable as they think, and really do need more money. Well, this is all fine because it's clear to all that the basic enterprise is going to be a money tree one day. And what does it matter if they sign over another 15%? It's just money. It's not important in the way that shutter mechanisms are, is it? And then they find out that yes, it is. It is everything. Suddenly the world's turned upside down. Suddenly those nice people aren't so friendly anymore. Suddenly it turns out that those bits of paper they signed in a hurry were advised to sign by people who smiled all the time, mean that they don't actually own anything. Nothing at all. Not patents, not property, nothing. Not even the contents of their own heads, indeed. Even any ideas they have now don't belong to them, apparently, and somehow they're still in trouble about money. Well, some run and some hide, and some try to fight, which is foolish in the extreme because it turns out that everything is legal. It really is. Some accept low-level jobs in the enterprise. Some because someone has to live, and in any case the enterprise even owns their dreams at night. And yet actually legality, it would appear, has not taken place. Business is business. Lord Vetinari opened his eyes. The men around the table were staring at him. "Just thinking out loud," he said. "I am sure you will point out that this is not the business of the government. I know Mr. Gilt will. However, since you acquired the Grand Trunk at a fraction of its value, I note the breakdowns are increasing. The speed of messages has slowed down, and the cost of customers has risen. Last week, the Grand Trunk was closed for almost 3 days. We could not even talk to Stolat, hardly as fast as light, gentlemen." "That was for essential maintenance," Mr. Slant began. "No, it was for repairs," snapped Vetinari. "Under the previous management, the system shut down for an hour every day. That was for maintenance. Now the towers run until they break down. What do you think you are doing, gentlemen?" "That, my lord, and with respect, is none of your business." Lord Vetinari smiled. For the first time that morning, it was a smile of genuine pleasure. "Ah, Mr. Reacher Gilt, I was wondering when we'd hear from you. You have been so uncharacteristically silent. I read your recent article in the Times with great interest. You are passionate about freedom, I gather. You used the word tyranny 3 times and the word tyrant once." "Don't patronize me, my lord," said Gilt. "We own the trunk. It is our property. You understand that? Property is the foundation of freedom. Oh, customers complain about the service and the cost, but customers always complain when about such things even. We have no shortage of customers at whatever cost. Before the semaphore, news from Genua took months to get here, and now it takes less than a day. It is affordable magic." When my mouth opens a lot. Yeah. I do, I'm very proud of them. Yeah. But thank you. Yeah. It is affordable magic. We are answerable to our shareholders, my lord, not with respect to you. It is not your business, it is our business, and we will run it according to the market. I hope there are no tyrannies here. This is, with respect, a free city. "Such a lot of respect is gratifying," said the patrician. "But the only choice your customers have is between you and nothing." "Exactly," said Reacher Gilt calmly. "There is always a choice. They can ride a horse a few thousand miles, or they can wait patiently till we can send their message." Vetinari gave him a smile that lasted as long as a lightning flash. or fund and build another system, he said. Although I note that every other company that has lately tried to run a JAQK system in the opposition has failed quite quickly, sometimes in distressing circumstances. Falls from the tops of JAQK towers and so on. Accidents do happen. It is most unfortunate, said Mr. Slant stiffly. Most unfortunate, Veterinary echoed. He pulled the paper towards him once again, dislodging the file slightly so that a few more names were visible, and wrote, most unfortunate. Well, I believe that covers everything, he said. In fact, the purpose of this meeting was to tell you formally that I am, at last, reopening the post office as planned. This is just a courtesy announcement, but I feel I should tell you, because you are, after all, in the same business. I believe the recent string of accidents is now at an end. Reacher chuckled. Sorry, my lord, did I understand you correctly? You really intend to continue with this folly in the face of everything? The post office? When we all know that it was just a lumbering, smug, overstaffed, overweight monster of a place? It barely earned its keep. It was the very essence and exemplar of public enterprise. It never made much of a profit, it is true, but in the business areas of the city, there were 7 deliveries a day, said Veterinary, cold as the depths of the sea. Ha! Not at my end, said Mr. Horsefree. It was bloody useless. Indeed, a classic example of a corroded government. Government organisation dragging on the public purse, Guilt added. Too true, said Mr. Horsefree. They used to say that if you want to get rid of a dead body, you should take it to the post office, and it'd never be seen again. And was it? Said Lord Veterinary, raising an eyebrow. Was what? Was it seen again? There was a sudden hunted look in Mr. Horsefree's eyes. What? How would I know? Oh, I see, said Lord Veterinary. It was a joke. Ah, well. He shuffled the papers. Unfortunately, the post office came to be seen not as a system for moving the mail efficiently, to the benefit and profit of all, but as a money box. And so it collapsed, losing both mail and money. A lesson for us all, perhaps. Anyway, I have high hopes of Mr. Lipvig, a young man full of fresh ideas. A good head for heights, too, although I imagine he will not be climbing any towers. I do hope this resurrection will not prove to be a drain on our taxes, said Mr. Slant. I assure you, Mr. Slant, that apart from the modest sum necessary to, as it were, prime the pump, the postal service will be as self-supporting as indeed it used to be. We cannot have a drag on the public purse, can we? And now, gentlemen, I am conscious that I have been keeping you from your very important business. I do trust the trunk will be back in commission very shortly. As they stood up, Reacher leaned across from the table and said, May I congratulate you, my lord? I am delighted that you feel inclined to congratulate me on anything, Mr. Gilt, said Veterinary. To what do I owe this unique occurrence? This, my lord, said Gilt, gesturing to the little side table on which had been set the rough-hewn piece of stone. Is this not an original slab? Lamidos blue stone, isn't it? And the pieces look like basalt, which is the very devil to carve. A valuable antique, I think. It was a present to me from the Low King of the Dwarves, said Veterinary. It is indeed very old. And you have a game in progress, I see. You're playing the dwarf side, yes? Yes, I played by clacks against an old friend in your Uberwald, said Veterinary. Happily for me, your breakdown yesterday has given me an extra day to think of my next move. Their eyes met. Reacher laughed hugely. Veterinary smiled. The other men, who badly needed to laugh, laughed too. See, we're all friends. We're like colleagues, really.
Nothing bad is going to happen. The laughter died away, a little uneasily. Guilt and Vetinari maintained eye contact. "We should play a game," said Guilt. "I have a rather nice board myself. I play the troll side for preference." "Ruthless." Initially outnumbered, inevitably defeated in the hands of the careless player, said Vetinari. "Indeed, just as the dwarves rely on guile, feint, and swift changes of position. A man can learn all of an opponent's weaknesses on that board," said Guilt. "Really?" said Vetinari, raising his eyebrows. "Should he not be trying to learn his own?" "Oh, that's just thud! That's easy!" yapped a voice. Both men turned to look at Horsefree, who had been made perky by sheer relief. "I used to play it when I was a kid," he burbled. "It's boring. The dwarves always win." Guilt and Vetinari shared a look. It said, "While I loathe you in every aspect of your personal philosophy to a depth unplumbable by any line, I'll credit you with at least not being Crispin Horsefree." "Appearances are deceptive, Crispin," said Guilt jovially. A troll player needs never lose if he puts his mind to it." "I know I once got a dwarf stuck up my nose and Mummy had to get it out with a hairpin," said Horsefree, as if this were a source of immense pride. Guilt put an arm around the man's shoulders. "That's very interesting, Crispin," he said. "Do you think it's likely to happen again?" Vetinari stood at the window after they had left, watching the city below. After a few minutes, Drumknot drifted in. "There was a brief exchange in the anteroom, my lord," he said. Vetinari didn't turn around, but he held up a hand. "Let me see." I imagine one of them started saying something like, "Do you think he..." and Slant very quickly shushed him. "Mr. Horsefree, I suspect." Drumknot glanced at the paper in his hand. "Almost word to word, my lord." "It takes no great leap of the imagination," sighed Lord Vetinari. "Dear Mr. Slant, he's so dependable. Sometimes I really think, if he was not already a zombie, it would be necessary to have him turned into one." "Shall I order number 1 investigation on Mr. Guilt, my lord?" "Good heavens, no. He is far too clever. Order it on Mr. Horsefree." "Really, sir? But you did say yesterday that you believed him to be no more than a greedy fool." "A nervous fool, which is useful. He's a venal coward and a glutton. I've watched him sit down to a meal of poe-faux with white beans, and that was an impressive sight, Drumknot, which I will not easily forget. The sauce went everywhere. Those pink shirts he wears cost more than $100 too. Oh, he acquires other people's money in a safe and secret and not very clever way. Send Clerk Brian." "Brian, sir?" said Drumknot. "Are you sure? He's wonderful at devices but quite inept on the street. It'll be seen." "Yes, Drumknot, I know. I would like Mr. Horsefree to become a little more nervous." "I see, sir." Vetinari turned back to the window. "Tell me, Drumknot," he said. "Would you say I'm a tyrant?" "Most certainly not, my lord," said Drumknot, tidying the desk. "But of course that is the problem, is it not? Who will tell the tyrant he is the tyrant?" "That's a tricky one, my lord, certainly," said Drumknot, squaring up the files. In his thoughts, which I've always considered fare badly in translation, Buffant says that intervening in order to prevent a murder is to curtail the freedom of the murderer, and yet that freedom, by definition, is natural and universal, without condition, said Vetinari. You may recall his famous dictum, "If any man is not free, then I too am a small pie made of chicken," which has led to a considerable amount of debate. Thus we must consider, for example, that taking a bottle from a man killing himself with a drink is charitable, nay, praiseworthy act,
and yet freedom is curtailed once more. Mr. Guilt has studied his Buffon, but, I fear, failed to understand him. Freedom may be mankind's natural state, but so is sitting on a tree eating your dinner while it is still wriggling. On the other hand, Friediger, in Modal Contextualities, claims that all freedom is limited, artificial, and therefore illusory, a shared hallucination at best. No sane mortal is truly free, because true freedom is so terrible that only the mad or the divine can face it with open eyes. It overwhelms the soul, very much like the state he elsewhere describes as Astaskeit. What position would you take here, Drumknot?
I've always thought, my lord, that what the world really needs are filing boxes, which are not so flimsy,
said Drumknot, after a moment's pause. Said Lord Vetinari. A point to think about, certainly. He stopped. On the carven decorations over the room's fireplace, a small cherub began to turn, with a faint squeaking noise. Vetinari raised an eyebrow at Drumknot. I shall have a word with Clerk Brian immediately, my lord, said the clerk. Good. Tell him it's time he got out into the fresh air once more. We'll leave it there. Beginning chapter 4. Yeah. I think I slowly got worse and worse as time went on. I started strong, but I think my focus and concentration slowly got worse, and I ended up reading and overlapping over and over again. And it wasn't great. But I'm hoping maybe that I can somehow get better at it next time. I do need to practice more reading out loud, because usually there's a difference between focusing. Yeah, there's a difference between reading and, verbally barfing all over a stream and actually reading words off of a very small page. I think I really need to, get my eyes tested or something. Maybe see if I need glasses. But anyway. Thank you, Smooth.
You always do great.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you for the sub. It's much appreciated. But yeah, so with that, I'm going to leave it here. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for listening. I hope it, I hope it did something for you regardless. And I hope that everyone stays safe, okay? So have a good day. Goodbye for now, everyone. Goodbye. Goodbye.